Go ahead, Pam.
Okay, great. Well, thank you everyone for joining us here tonight. I believe we have quorum. I'm not seeing the gallery, but Ali, can you tell me if, or Rosa? Let me change. Oh, great. There's Jason. There's Sunny. Okay. All right. I feel like Mr. Rogers. And I see you and I see you. Okay, great. Anyway, great. So I will officially call this meeting to order at 6:01. Would anybody like to make a motion to approve the agenda for tonight?
I will so move. Oh,
Great. Chuck?
Can I ask a question of the board first? Before you approve the agenda, staff have a request. We, under matters from the department, both item 10A and 10B, we have guests from other departments who are joining to present on those items. Both of those guests often have multiple other advisory board and city council meetings in the month. And so we would love it if you would move that item to precede the item for discussion. And so our proposal, we would never go out of order without consulting with the board, but our proposal is that items 10A and B move to precede item 9A, your item for discussion.
Ali, thanks for catching that. I wrote it down on the 2 sentences below that, so I'm sorry.
I think we need a second and then we can discuss it. Is that correct?
Someone needs to make the motion. I cannot.
I so move.
To make the motion?
And I'll second that.
Okay, great. Is everybody okay with us doing that for the agenda, moving it up? Great, thumbs up. Perfect.
Yep.
Thanks, okay, all right, great. Okay. And Rosa, I don't know if you can track that too, just in case I'll write it on my notes, but I don't want to make that mistake again. All right, perfect. So thank you for approving the agenda. We'll move on to future board and items. Now, Ali, I didn't have you down to make an update. That wasn't in the agenda. Did you want to make an update?
I'm sorry, Pam, I'm not sure I follow.
Sorry, I got my template screwed up. Anyway, public participation. Right.
I think next we have future board items and tours.
Well, that's what I had, and it said this item will be presented by the director to highlight the upcoming board activities.
Yep.
Okay.
Perfect. I can do that. And since I'm talking, I'll just note that I believe Mary's video could be enabled when one of our behind the scene folks, or Rosa, when you have a moment, if you could enable that for Mary, our board member. The things I think are most important to call out, actually, in November, I'm thrilled that we're going to be able to give you an overview of the 2023 budget that City Council approved last week with a 7-2 vote. And so we'll have an update from our business services manager, just highlighting some of the positions and programs and enhancements that budget appropriate spending for. We're pretty excited. And so that just happened last week. We'll give you an item there in November. November will also be bringing you the synthesis of the analysis of the research and the engagement we have been doing for the Boulder Reservoir After Action Review. You'll get matters from the department also on a process for the Pleasant View access update. And that's around transit access of all kinds, biking, walking. We don't have flying there yet. There's lots of flights over it, and there are also vehicles. We have this Crab Retreat follow item that is in italics because we've not yet received direction from City Council if there will be a letter from members of the boards and commissions. As a reminder, we are in the middle of a 2-year City Council term, and their retreat will be different. They have a 2-year work plan, and so they may be discussing updates to it and what input there is from boards and commissions we've not yet heard. As we move through the end of the year, the only thing I'll say out loud is note that your meeting is December 12th, and that was to try and protect people's time off over the holidays. So it's going to be a quick whirlwind of meetings with your retreat on the 7th, the November meeting, the 28th, and the December meeting on the 12th.
And for now, the December meeting is still virtual?
Ooh. We can talk about that under matters from the board or matters from the department. We have news and updates.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sounds good. Thank you for that. We'll now move on to public participation. And this portion of the meeting is for members of the public to communicate ideas and concerns to the board regarding parks and recreation issues for which a public hearing is not scheduled later in the meeting. Tonight, there are no public hearings. And during this public participation, the public is encouraged to comment on the need for parks and recreation programs and facilities as you perceive them. All speakers are limited to 3 minutes. Depending on the nature of your matter, you may or may not receive a response from the board after you deliver your comment. The board is always listening to you, appreciative of all your feedback. And Secretary, would you please present the additional guidelines and then call in our first speaker tonight?
Just 1 second here, just
Sure.
1 second.
No problem.
Ellie, can you help me out? If you have that up, would you be able to read it?
Muted.
So many jokes about a mute button. We'll see who gets it up faster, Rosa or I, but in the
Okay.
meantime, I can start talking about it and the fact that the city worked with community members several years ago to co-create guidelines for meaningful and more productive civic engagement. And what that's about is just making sure we have a safe space for community members to share, a safe space for our staff and for our advisory board members. And so what those guidelines do is talk about the way that people can communicate. One thing I know is that people who are communicating, you will not be able to turn on your video, but we will be able to hear you. Do we have folks signed up for public participation, Rosa?
I don't have anybody.
All right, well then we'll save those guidelines for next meeting and have this all smoothed out.
Okay,
I think everyone on this call knows that we have really great, meaningful public engagement guidelines. I don't see a single member of the public with us tonight. So we'll be more streamlined next month and we can move to the next item.
okay, so sorry, I do have it up already, but no public comment. Okay,
Okay, great. We'll just move on to the consent agenda. Would anybody like to make a motion to approve the minutes from September 26th?
I'll move.
Great. May I get a second? I'll second.
I'll second.
Oh, okay. Or Jason.
Now go for it, Pam. All yours.
Fantastic. Okay. All right. Right. Okay, then it passes. The next one is, now this is where I put you, Ally. I added you since you weren't here. Did you want to just skip it and go directly to the Parks and Recreation project updates? Or do you want us to flip and bring the people up now?
My recommendation was to bring them in before our discussion item. So that's after on the consent, it was number 9, I believe, on the agenda.
Okay, for
And
Matt.
so, yep, if we should approve the minutes and if folks have any questions on the consent item, either our project updates or development update or operation updates, as always, you've got some incredible city staff and subject matter experts here to answer your questions.
I just wanted to say one thing. I thought your incentive program for your aquatics program and your staffing was, I've never seen anything like it. It was really interesting. And I loved seeing how it played out over the last 6 months to a year. So I thought that was really well done.
Thanks for that, Pam. There's several teammates on this meeting who helped to make that happen. Folks from across the recreation service area, Megan Lohman, Brian Beery, Jackson Height really did a great job being thoughtful with this opportunity from the state of what I'll just let you know, when Megan popped on $25,000 announced on June 30th wasn't a lot to make a significant difference in our level of operations, but it did allow us to pilot some programs. So that was pretty exciting. Megan, if you want to add something, please do.
I think I will just say, anytime you're given any amount of money with short notice to try to make something happen, you know, you can look at it a couple of ways. And I think I was really proud of how the whole team came together, especially our business services side and our aquatics team, to try to figure out what would be most meaningful with the really quick turnaround time. And, you know, we figured out what worked, and sometimes what maybe could have worked better with slight tweaks in the future. And so it was we took advantage of the opportunity where, you know, we might not have been able to test some of those things otherwise. So really happy about it overall.
Well done. Go ahead, Chuck.
So I really enjoyed reading about the Columbia Cemetery and the work that you did there. And then I got onto the Burial Index website. And I actually had a good time poking around there, looking at the names of the people who've been buried and how they died and where they were buried in the park. So I'd like to commend your staff for coming out with that very valuable resource.
Yeah, our
That's-
Mark
that's
Davison,
fun.
our planning senior manager, is here. I don't know if he wants to add anything to that, but Chuck, if you're ever tired of being a climate scientist, we're always looking for great volunteers at Columbia Cemetery to help with headstone maintenance. We're looking for people to play our spirits at our Meet the Spirit event. So lots of opportunities.
Ali, I'd just add we've hired a new cultural coordinator on board, so we're actually making more progress now with managing those assets. So it's great news.
Mark, welcome to the team. I think this is the first time we've seen your face. So anyway, nice to have you aboard.
Thank you. Welcome.
Okay, perfect. Wonderful. So then we may have a motion to approve, or we did? Yeah, okay, we're good. All right. The next one we're moving is action items, and I have none. So matters for discussion is going to be North Boulder Park Review, but we're going to flip it. And so we're going to give it to Allie. And who do you want to start with, Allie? Which
Yeah,
way?
so we're going to start with this role overview from the city attorney, and just to frame the issue, I'll remind members of the board, as you've been talking about your retreat agenda, and even just, you know, the prep or the role understanding for new board members, we thought it would be really helpful to hear from the city attorney about the advisory board's functions and organization. And so I'm really grateful that with us tonight is Sandra Yanis. She is the deputy city attorney. She's been with the city, I think, slightly less than I have, so a really long time, and she's been Parks and Rec attorney for a really long time. One of the benefits of the city of Boulder is that we have in-house counsel, and having a lawyer on your team and on your side is incredibly beneficial. And I'm really grateful for Sandra. And so with that, I'll hand it to her to start the presentation. We have about 10 minutes for you, or maybe a little less, and then time for questions.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Allie. Can you all hear me? Okay, great. Next slide, please. All right, so we're here tonight to talk about our different roles within the city. And many of you already know this, but the city council is the legislative branch of the city organization, and they're responsible for passing the city laws and for setting the policy. Then we have the city manager and their departments, and that's similar to the executive branch or the administrative function of the organization, and they handle the day-to-day work of the city. And then we have boards and commissions, which we're going to talk about tonight, and they provide recommendations to council. We have many, many boards and commissions, and you all provide a really valuable service to the organization. So thank you so much for your time and volunteering for this important work. So we're going to start off talking about sort of the differences between the city charter and the Boulder Revised Code. And some people find this a little bit confusing, but basically the city charter provides the framework. And it's the kind of like the high level philosophy, while the Boulder Revised Code, or the BRC, provides the detail to that framework. So as an example, Charter Article 11 is applicable to the Department of Parks and Rec and PRAB. And for example, Section 154 defines parkland. And then you've got Section 157 that talks about the creation of PRAB. Section 160 that identifies PRAB's role and responsibilities. So there's a lot of really good, juicy stuff in the charter. And then the Boulder Revised Code provides more detail based on the charter. So for example, BRC Section 2310 states that PRAB is a 7-member board with 5-year terms. And it also, again, defines what the board can and cannot do. So if you think about it in terms of the charter being similar to the US Constitution, with the Boulder Revised Code being similar to the federal statutes that support and implement the Constitution. Next slide, please. So let's talk a little bit about PRAB's role and responsibilities. And first of all, I'd like to just mention that you will see in parts of the charter and the code that the use of the term shall and the use of the term may. And that's an important distinction because it really identifies what the responsibilities are and where there's discretion. And so one of the biggest responsibilities of PRAB is related to the disposal of parklands. And so City Council has authority to dispose of parkland, but only if they have the affirmative vote of at least 4 members of PRAB. And then an advisory recommendation, which is not binding on council, has to be obtained from the planning board prior to the disposition or lease of parklands. City Council also has authority to acquire parkland so long as they get a recommendation from PRAB and the planning board. The recommendations of those boards are not binding on the council, except that PRAB's recommendation concerning expenditures from the Permanent Parks and Rec Fund shall be binding on council. So as an example, we've got Belmont City Park, and then we have some land in Area 3 that was purchased as parkland as well. Next, let's talk about the appropriation or expenditures from the Permanent Parks and Recreation Fund. So expenditures from this fund can only be made upon the favorable recommendation of PRAB and appropriation by council. Funds cannot be used for any purpose other than the acquisition of parkland or the permanent improvement of park and recreation facilities. As an example of this, the budget, it has capital, but it's also the planning team. So there are things in the budget that need to be addressed with respect to the Parks and Recreation Fund. And so that's an example of where you might see that. And then the third part here is the protection and maintenance of park lands. And that's pretty self-explanatory, but it is somewhat unique. This is found in the Boulder Revised Code, but it's not listed in the charter. So it's a little bit unique in that it was drafted this way. And I'm looking into the reasoning behind how that came about to learn more about that. Next slide, please. So next we have, this is another unique responsibility, I think, of PRAB. So they actually, you all actually have the requirement to approve or deny licenses or permits on parklands. And the way this came about is Charter 164 gives council authority to approve or deny permits or licenses in or on parklands, but it requires the affirmative vote of at least 4 members of PRAB. So several years, or many years ago actually, council delegated some of this authority to PRAB by giving PRAB authority to approve or deny any license or permit on parkland so long as it did not exceed 3 years. If the term is for 3 years, or excuse me, over 3 years, then it has to go to council. And this is found in the Boulder Revised Code under 8-3-23. And then in addition to that, many years ago, PRAB subdelegated its authority to staff to approve any term of 1 year or less, or renewals. So this is kind of a unique situation because PRAB has the authority on those particular leases, you know, from 1 to 3 years, and then for less than over a year, it goes to staff. And then the second bullet here has to do with making recommendations to council concerning the Parks and Rec annual budget. So that's pretty self-explanatory as well. Next slide, please. So at the request of council or the department, PRAB may prepare and submit recommendations on other parks and recreation matters not called out. I kind of think of this as the catch-all function, and that's pretty self-explanatory as well. And then the second part of this is that PRAB may request information and recommendations from the department on other Parks and Rec matters. But one thing that you need to know is that Charter 155 says that the department has discretion on whether or not to provide those requests on other matters. And so typically, you know, if there are resource issues or if there's capacity on the work, the department would have the ability, or they do have the ability, to either grant or deny a request for additional information. Next slide, please. This slide just talks about the things that you all can't do. You're not able to issue subpoenas. We have some boards and commissions that do have the ability to do that, but you all don't do quasi-judicial hearings, which is kind of a nice thing. And so you don't need to have that subpoena authority. And then the second part of this is that you are not allowed to perform any administrative functions unless they're expressly provided in the charter. And so, basically you're not allowed to direct administrative functions. And as I mentioned before, these are known as executive functions, the administrative functions, and that's the responsibility of the city manager. Council is also prohibited from directing administrative functions. And so, as an example, PRAB would not be able to design or deliver programming, but you all can provide input as a board and as solicited by staff. And then you also are not able to make decisions about the hiring, performance, or firing of employees or performing those functions. All right, next slide, please. So again, just wanting to mention the distinctions between shall and may. This has to do with the department's role. So we're switching gears a little bit. So the department shall supervise, administer, and maintain all park property and recreation facilities, execute all programs, plans, functions, and activities, prepare and submit to PRAB written recommendations on those matters, and may, at the request of PRAB, prepare and submit to PRAB information and recommendations on other matters. And lastly, may request advice on any parks and recreation matter. Next slide, please. So the organization, PRAB's organization and other requirements come from Charter Section 157, 158, 159, and the Boulder Revised Code 231 and 2310. And as you can see, members select a chair. You all have regular meetings once a month. Special meetings may be called at any time by 3 members with at least 24 hours notice to other board members. And then 4 members constitute a quorum. And you also have the power to make reasonable rules for the conduct of its business. So I believe you were provided a link to the PRAB handbook. And this was created by board members many years ago with City Attorney's Office's input. And it is an incredible resource. You are so lucky to have all of these references to the charter and the code that I've mentioned tonight all in one place. But it also provides direction and information about open meetings laws and meeting procedures and that sort of thing. Next slide, please. Right. So as I mentioned, the board members shall select a chair, a vice chair, and secretary. The department typically serves as the secretary. And then again, oh, this looks like it was duplicated. I'm sorry about that. So we can actually move on. All of this stuff you'll find, as I mentioned, in your handy dandy PRAB handbook. And with that, I'm going to hand it off to Allie.
Thanks for that, Sandra. As she mentioned, how you conduct your business is spelled out in that handbook that was created by board members. I believe it was in 07 or 08. And so the agenda committee, the role of that is spelled out as a reminder. The department prepares the future board items and tours that we included in your meeting agenda tonight. We will use that for a conversation that we have with the chair and the vice chair. In that, we outline the items where we either require by the code that Sandra just outlined as a shall, we require the board's input, or we believe that the matter that we're being discussed would benefit from your input as council's appointed representatives on Parks and Recreation matters. And so we talk about those items, and that may include PRAB requests to the department. Sometimes some will say, I would like to talk about X. And we say the appropriate way to do that is submit it to the chair and the vice chair to be discussed at agenda setting. And then another thing that is spelled out in your handbook that I don't want to read to you, but I would encourage you to check out is just how PRAB should have conversations about items that are not on the agenda. That's something we've talked about at a high level. And there's just that handbook spells that out as a way to conduct your business. And if you all obviously can discuss changes to that handbook, but that's the current mode of operation. And it outlines how to do it in a way that honors sunshine laws, right? About noticing media and agenda topics and making sure there's board discussion on topics that you choose to explore. And then I think we can go to the next slide. Oh, that was it. I thought I had one more. I guess not. So with that, and I guess if we go back to that slide, those are on pages 14 and 15 of the handbook, and I find them very helpful. And so with that, Sandra and I, if appropriate, but most likely Sandra, are here for questions if you have them.
Sorry, I was on mute. Elliot and then Chuck.
Thanks. That was really helpful and informative. I had 2 questions. One is, maybe I misheard you, but are there instances where the department can decline to provide information or recommendations to the PRAB that are requested by the PRAB?
Yes, you did hear correctly. They have discretion because of the use of the word may. It means that the department may or may not provide that information. And I think that was intended to really be able to take into consideration the allocation of resources for a department. You know, if they're not able to handle it, they can decline or delay it to another time, but it provides a little bit of flexibility for the department.
Okay, thanks for that. And then the second question was, when was this handbook last updated? Do we know?
I think it's been a long time. I think,
It says on the cover, let me
Let
just
me
flip
check,
to it if I
yeah.
may.
it's 2008. And I have to say, not much has changed with respect to the charter and the code. But certainly you all have the ability to adjust or amend or make changes to your internal rules related to how you conduct your meetings and that sort of thing. So that might be something for you all to consider.
Okay, thank you.
You bet.
Chuck?
So you mentioned that we don't have subpoena powers because we don't have any quasi judicial functions. But I thought that we did have quasi judicial hearings for disposal of parkland, for example. Am I incorrect in that? I kind of recall having a quasi judicial hearing in my very first year
So-
on PRAB.
You would have to have a public hearing about disposal, but it's not quasi judicial in nature. So typically quasi judicial hearings are related to a property right, or like if you think of like a license or that's not a good, well, so the alcohol, the beverage licensing authority has quasi judicial functions because they're granting a license to serve alcohol, which has been considered under the law of property right. Or as another example, planning board, obviously they deal with issues related to property. But the disposal is not a per se quasi judicial hearing. No, it does require a public hearing though.
It may have been a property swap or something up by Foothills Community Park. It's tickling my memory. Allie, do you remember?
I do, and I believe it was a full public hearing. It was when there was a disposal of land for an easement. It wasn't actually real parkland, but it was designated as such. If that's the one you're talking about, it was a couple of years ago. It was an item for action and a roll call vote, but I don't recall it being quasi judicial in nature. And Sandra, maybe if what I can recall of when I've been a part of quasi judicial hearings is that the rules of procedure are much more formal and stringent. They require board members to disclose if there's been ex parte communications, and I'm not aware of that ever being a part of our procedure or there being matters under your jurisdiction that require it.
Yeah, I think you covered it really well, Allie. It's a kind of akin to a little mini trial, actually. So there's a lot of, due process considerations and that sort of thing. Well, it's typically related to an applicant's due process rights. And so, yep. Thank you for your question. Elliot, looks like you have your hand up again. No? Okay, an old hand. Jason.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for that great presentation. I had a question, and I don't know if this is about feedback or not, but you said there was a line about at the request of council or the department, PRAB could. What was the? Sorry, I tried to write it all down. And I didn't get it, but it was early on.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to answer that, and maybe we can even provide you with this PowerPoint so you can have it. But so
I guess I could just ask my So my question is, we usually, that applies to like the end of the year letter, like council requests, information from all boards, via letter, and the boards, provide some feedback. Are there other examples of kind of that back and forth process? I don't know if that's clear or not, but I don't know if this issue falls in that particular category you were describing.
I think that it does, but it could also apply to another situation where there might be some timely relevant issue that's come up that they need guidance and recommendation from PRAB. They may just independently reach out and ask for that based on whatever's coming before them, or something that's arisen in the community that needs that kind of attention from the advisory board. So I think that you're right, it does relate to the feedback that they ask for from all boards and commissions, but I think that it also could apply to other situations.
So the reason I'm asking that is, and sorry, that wasn't super clear how I framed that, but I think, one of the reasons that we've asked, or that I think this is really helpful leading up to our retreat, is kind of figuring out, PRAB's role in some of the major issues, facing the city. And so this was helpful in kind of framing our retreat in November. I guess I'd be curious about the reverse. Like, are there instances of, a board, providing recommendations without being asked? That could be obviously ignored, but is that something that's common, or is that like, doesn't seem like it's prohibited in this case? Like, here's a clear kind of, at the request of council, a board can do this, but can it be the reverse? Can a board provide, thoughts, feedback, anything on any issue without having that request from council?
I guess it would depend on the item, and I'll defer to Allie here in a moment, because I know that you all have a couple of items that you have some interest in that may not be necessarily coming before this board. But I think that it would depend on the situation. Sometimes there's a role that may come before this board, but it's a question of timing. And so I don't think that it's necessarily prohibited. However,
May not be welcome, but
it might not be welcome.
yeah. Well, it could be ignored too. I think that's just the question, like, can
Yeah.
boards, this board or others, like, provide kind of proactive, feedback or thoughts, even if not asked, or if it's not necessarily an issue, in front of the board. So, and I don't mean to go down a kind of rabbit hole here. I was just curious, like, about that particular phrasing of that.
Yeah.
Thank
It's
you.
a good question. And, council, they get so much information that they of course prioritize, right? In terms of what they need to get through. So I don't know, if it's not asked for, what kind of priority would be given.
Okay, thanks.
And I can add something, but I'm curious, Elliot, if your question is similar or separate, because if it's similar, you feel like maybe you should share, and then I can add a thought.
I was just going to offer an example. We've done that pretty recently when we issued the resolution as a board that council then adopted. So that was like a one way, like, we sent a message to council about how we felt in a pretty unique circumstance. But I just wanted to offer that as an example of something we've done.
Yeah. Yeah, I was actually thinking of a similar thing. Jason, you said a key word in your comment that if we proactively wanted to share feedback with council, we every single Monday spend about an hour and a half, Sandra and I, the directors from the department, city staff, talking about the council agenda. And so we know what's on the runway 4, 5, 6 months out, and we try and flag ahead of time. This is a thing the Parks and Rec Advisory Board should be weighing in on before it goes to city council. And so it would not be our desire for something to get to council and they'd be like, well, why hasn't PRAB weighed in on this? Right? We try to be pretty thoughtful about that. And you could see, obviously the budget's a really big, not low hanging fruit example, but in every item that they reviewed for the 2023 budget, we shared with them your feedback. What I would add as far as when you're able to, talk about things under matters from the board, again, I think pages 14 and 15 of the handbook are really helpful. What I would offer is to when it is relevant and helpful to council and when it's not, really goes back to those slides. So the example that Elliot just gave, approving the concept plan for the Boulder Reservoir Visitor Service Center, approving the expenditure of the capital, approving the lease with the partner, those were all PRAB actions. And I believe that the action you took last summer, that resolution, all were in support and defense of those actions. They were in line with your role. If you were to, I'm going to make this up, go completely off the rails and say we wanted to write a resolution in support of, I can't even give a good example because it'll be offensive somehow. If you wanted to write a resolution in support of moon exploration, right? Because that was just a topic you felt was appropriate for the Parks and Rec Advisory Board. I think the question I would ask you is that, are you then 7 appointed members by City Council? What makes you different from any other of the 104,000 community members on that topic? And I think that's a really good litmus test, right? Because your purview is, as Sandra has just described it, it's around Parks and Recreation matters, specifically the shalls, right? And then the maze is where it is kind of up for discussion. If you were to consult with me and say, Allie, we're feeling really strongly about moon travel, I would say that's great. Probably the most appropriate path is for you to speak as individual members of the community, because that topic's not relevant to your role as a Parks and Rec Advisory Board. If you were to consult me, which you're not required to do.
If we had thoughts on moon exploration, so. As I said, that, and then Elliot's example of where, where we've taken proactive action, I think that's really helpful and kind of, good guidance, leading up to our discussion on in November. So thanks.
Great. Anybody else?
Can I ask Elliot, did you ask because you're thinking that might be a good project for us to work on?
Did you mean to direct that to Jason?
No, weren't you the one that said, how long has it been since that was done? And then we heard that's 15 years.
Oh yeah. Sorry, I wasn't sure if you were referring to the last the question. Yeah, no, I mean, I would just be curious to see whether anybody's thought through whether this could use some updating. Could be something to look at, given that it's been some time. But I'm not, volunteering anybody for extra work or anything. I'm just noting, could be something to consider.
I don't see any more hands, so unless anyone else has anything else, it's really been a pleasure being here with you all tonight. And again, thank you so much for your service to the community, and have a great evening.
Thank you. Nice to meet you.
Thank you so much, Sandra.
You bet. Bye-bye.
Can I say one thing, Pamela?
Yes, of course.
There's a new button that I've never seen, and it's at the top of my screen, and it says Q&A. And there's a member of the community who's been wondering when public comment was, and no one has answered. I don't know if I should, or Rosa, or how we work that, I guess.
Yeah, we've been working on that. Rosa and I
Oh, sorry. Okay.
That's okay. No, that's okay. But since we voted on the matters from the department, we're going to go through these presentations, and I've asked Rosa if she can let Lynn Siegel know that we'll vote on it after, because she missed the public comment. So we're going to go through the presentations, and then we'll bring it up for a vote after, before we go into matters for discussion. Is that okay, Mary? Okay, sounds good. Great. So, Allie, did you want to introduce the next presentation?
Yeah, I just again will thank, we have, you folks know I maybe call me biased, but we have such smart people across the city, and I'm really grateful that we have David D.K. Kemp and his colleague, I believe Valerie Watson is here. They're both with the Transportation and Mobility Department, and they're here to talk to you about micromobility, or in other words, scooters. So DK, thanks for joining us, and the floor is yours.
Great, thank you so much, Allie, and I really appreciate the time to present to the Parks and Recreation Advisory Board. It's nice to virtually meet some of you. I do know a few of you as well. So again, nice to be in front of you to talk about micromobility, and specifically our shared e-scooter program. Okay, so I promised Allie I'd be really quick here. So I'm going to go through these slides, and then we can have a brief discussion in terms of some of the input we're looking for. All right, so just a quick review at looking at the purpose of why we're doing this micromobility program. And, this is, coming out from a perspective where we're trying to provide safe and equitable, sustainable forms of transportation, improving quality of life, making connections to transit, overall reducing our traffic congestion and greenhouse gas emissions. So we see micromobility as a tool to accomplish a lot of those things. So the evaluation process to date. So back in October of 2020, council gave staff direction to go ahead and add scooters as part of its micromobility program. And so over the past year, well, 2 years ago, we went through an RFP process and working with a group of community stakeholders, and we developed a scope of work. And then in August of 21, we selected and initiated the program using Lime. And so Lime is our partner on this. And so over the past year, we've been studying it and seeing how it's working, evaluating it. And so now we're at the point where we are sharing preliminary findings with all of our stakeholders before we go to City Council here in December with our proposed next steps. And so you're on the list. You're important to us, and we want to hear some of your input. And so that's why we're here tonight. And so looking at the evaluation criteria, we came up with this list prior to initiating the program, because these are the things that we're really studying here. And just name a few that I think are of utmost importance: safety, crash and close calls, equity, mode shift, and then community feedback and sustainability. I think those all really kind of rise to the top. Okay, so let's look at the numbers here. So again, over the course of the year, August 21 through August 22, we currently have about 300 e-scooters that are deployed in East Boulder. Now, when we got direction from City Council to move forward with this pilot, they said, let's try this out, but let's try it east of 28th Street. We said, sure, let's give it a shot. And so since then, we've got, again, 300 scooters east of 28th, racking up about 115,000 trips or 117,700 miles. Average trips per device per day, 1.5. You can kind of go down the list there yourself and see what the major statistics are. But the approximate greenhouse gas savings, metric tons, 11.8. That's something we're really looking to in terms of the greenhouse gas savings. And what is 11.8 metric tons? Well, there's a couple different ways you can look at it, but I'll give you a simple one, and it's essentially burning 1,330 gallons of gasoline. So it had a good impact. And then the other piece here is crashes. We were really concerned about the safety, and of course, one crash is too many, but we haven't seen as many as we thought we were going to, for a number of reasons that the report will really get into for why. But we've seen 2 that have occurred on campus, at CU, East Boulder campus, and then 2 that have occurred in the city's right of way. All right, so a quick look at this. This is just a kind of a snapshot. This is a heat map looking at all the streets and paths where e-scooters are being ridden. And of course, the darker color, the purple there, denotes higher activity. That's 30th Street kind of running right down the middle there. And you can see that it's a major corridor. And then of course, you got Boulder Creek Path and then a Goose Creek Path. And I guess you could look at this and say, they're pretty much going everywhere. People are utilizing these things for both fun, recreation, and transportation purposes. Let's get into that. So let's look at the trip origins here. So again, these polygons here represent where people have began their trip. And so the concentration again along that 30th parallel there, and I guess that would be a longitude. And so up north, equity being an important part of this and how well these work for these underserved community members. We've called out Orchard Grove and San Juan del Centro, Vista, Parkside Villages, and San Lazaro. The other big piece of this is how students are using this. And so East Boulder CU Boulder's East Campus and CU Boulder's Williams Village is also on the list as sort of a high activity area. But then of course, a lot of the economic activity is happening there on 29th Street Mall, Whole Foods and Target and whatnot. So, okay, so what are we hearing? So the city administered a questionnaire. We got over 1,000 responses. Very good. And then Lime also did a questionnaire to their customers specifically and had 175. We also taken information through our Inquire Boulder reports. I'm sure we all know what those are. And then again, we've got direct contact with city and also Lime staff. So what are we hearing? I think, we're hearing kind of both good and bad. Starting with some of the challenges: parking issues, blocking or impeding pedestrian travel, abandoned e-scooters, people not feeling safe on a street while riding a scooter. People have witnessed unsafe riding behaviors. There's aesthetic concerns. Sometimes they feel like they represent clutter in the community. But then there's also the appreciation for this new program. It's a new way to get around town. They want to go west of 28th Street. They're ready to expand, and so their trip gets cut short when they're looking to cross over 28th Street at the moment. So a lot of the trips that we're seeing are really north-south at this point. But folks see that as an alternative to driving. It's more convenient, and again, it's a fun way to get to work, school, shop, and also recreate. Oops. Sorry about that. And so, what we're hearing, that's one thing. And of course, we're out in the field taking a look at what's actually happening as well. So both eyes, ears open and eyes on the ground. And we are seeing a lot of the same things that have been reported. Again, both challenges and opportunities. And then, we really want to find out, well, why? Why are people using these scooters? How are they using them? And again, we go back to thinking about recreation versus utilitarian uses. Both are important, right? People are looking for fun things to do when they come to Boulder. And so for fun and recreation is an important piece of our lifestyle here. But then people are also using for these utilitarian purposes, like connecting to transit, getting to school, and then also getting to work, and for shopping. Then we talk about mode shift. So what if these scooters weren't here? These folks have made their trip. And so this is important to us from a transportation perspective. And so, again, looking at, our goal is really to start minimizing or reducing single occupancy vehicle trips, right? We want to see us cut down those greenhouse gases. And so a big impetus for us to move forward with this was to say, hey, how many motor vehicle trips are we decreasing here? And so, as you can see, there's been a pretty good impact with people saying they would have driven a car or they would have taken a ride-hailing device like Lyft. But there are also people that would have walked. And so, are we stealing away from active transportation travel? Maybe a little bit, but it seems that with options, more sustainable options, people will gravitate toward those too. And so, over time, we might see that balance out. But I think the convenience factor of being able to get to your destination quicker than walking is one of the attractive elements. Okay, let's talk about parks. And so in the very beginning of the pilot program, we worked closely with Parks and Recreation staff to say, hey, how can we minimize the impact here? We want this to be successful, and what are some ways in which we can do that? And so we said, well, let's not have them, be operable in our city parks, like on our lawns and whatnot, that we put a lot of investment into and care, and those things have the potential to really, tear them up. And so this is just a couple of parks, 4 of the parks that are listed here. There's others, but we're able to use this technology called geofencing, because each device has a GPS unit within the scooter. And we can program that to say, you may operate here, but you may not operate over here. And we can also do that with parking too. We can designate parking spaces in different areas too. And so over time, and making sure that we stay in close contact with the maintenance personnel over parks and recreation, we've been able to really not have any major issues to date with our parks department, fortunately. Okay, that's it. So a couple questions for you is, do you have any observations from the pilot program that you'd like to share with me tonight? And then also, do you have any suggestions to refine the shared e-scooter program? We'll open it up for discussion.
I'm just looking at the gallery. Thank you for the presentation. I was telling Allie about, I'm pretty passionate about this subject. But I'm going to wait to see if the other board members have anything to say on it first. Oh, Mary, great. Go ahead, Mary, and then we'll go to Anita. You're on mute, Mary. Mary, we'll just go to Anita first and we'll come back to you. Okay. Hi, Anita. You're on mute too.
There we go. I think Rosa unmuted me.
Okay, Mary, go ahead. Go ahead.
Sorry,
That's-
Anita. Okay. So a couple things. I just wanted to know, is this I guess part of me is wondering, I think it sounds like the positives of the program is a great idea, but why is the city offering this, and why isn't this being done by the private sector? I guess that's one question. Secondly, I do like it, but it is hideous to have these things strewn about. So that is my big thing, is they'll be just dumped everywhere and you're stepping over them. And if you're on a bike, you got to walk. And I saw that wheelchair picture. That's disturbing to me. So those are my two questions. Thanks.
Good. Well, to answer your first one, it really is the private sector who is running the operation. We just went through the process to select the vendor through an RFP process. And so staff doesn't put any time into going out and moving scooters or picking them up. We work directly with the vendor to make changes to it, to the program. And what's been great about the vendor is that they've been very responsive to a lot of our concerns. Just getting to your second question, we realize there's work to do here. It's not a perfect system whatsoever, and there's some things that need to be fixed. And I think as we continue to hear comments and get feedback like that, this will tie into our proposed next steps and ways in which we can mitigate the issues and lean more on some of the benefits. So it's an evolution, if you will, of the program. Lime actually provides revenue to the city to support transportation plans, specifically the shared micromobility program. So there's a per ride fee that we charge both B-Cycle, the bikes, and Lime, and then we're collecting those funds, and then those will be used later on to support the program in one way or another. I hope that answers your question, Mary.
That does. I guess the bigger thing was, is this common nationally? Like, do cities do this? They have a bit of an affiliation with the company, and that's just how it goes, or are we unique in that?
Yes, it's very common. It's scooters and bikes, or shared micromobility is available in most US cities today. Yeah, we have a contract with them to provide that service for our community.
Anita? I can't hear you.
Is it possible your microphone's not on, Anita? Not the mute or unmute, but the actual microphone in Windows or Mac, whatever.
So Anita says she'll pass. Anita, if you type your question in, I can read it.
If I have comments too, but I'll give it, perfect. Jason, I'll pass it to you, and then Chuck.
Great, thanks. Yeah, thanks, Dave. That was a great presentation. I've written them before. They're super fun. Two questions, more kind of industry questions. I don't know if you're able to answer those. Is there a model out there that does kind of a front and back end docking, like, so you don't have the issue of just leaving them on the street, more like the biking model where you pick up the bike at a station, you return at a station, like that seems like that's, if there were more stations to check them out, to return on, like, we wouldn't have that issue. I don't know if there's a company that does that. Every time I've seen scooters, they've always just been kind of thrown all over the place, and I've never seen them where you return it. But just a question to you, if you're aware of a company that does do that.
Yes, and Lime does have that capability at this point. In the beginning of the program, council asked that we experiment with the true dockless system. And we're coming to find out that potentially a hybrid, both docked and dockless system, might do the trick. And so, currently there are some designated scooter parking places on campus, and we actually have a few new places in the city that we're also looking at. But because we have this GPS device, we have the ability to geofence, and essentially what that does is not allow a user to end the ride unless they're in a specific area. And that's that virtual parking area. But then we can also demarcate physically on the ground a space by which they have to park within that box, if you will. So that the technology is there. The other interesting piece is electrical infrastructure. So how do we at some point determine a way in which there's a rack, and also where the scooters can be docked and then plugged in for recharging, thereby eliminating some of the needed trips to go around and recharge the batteries. Each of the scooters have a swappable battery at this point, which is more efficient. But electrical infrastructure is something else that I think you're interested in.
Okay, great. And just, it seems to me like they look so damaged when they're thrown all over the place, and like that's got to be, costly as well as, like not having them returned to a dock versus just thrown on the street and potentially get run over. I'm sure the replacement costs are much higher, and damage and other kind of repair. So that's something that if it's not factored in, it seems like it should be.
Interestingly enough, it's not typically the user that mistreats the scooter. It's third-party vandalism, and so that's when the scooters are, thrown in ditches or put up in trees. There's been a variety of crazy or creative things that have been done, and it's unfortunate. Over the past year, we've lost 13 scooters in the community. Because of vandalism, really. But fortunately, the scooters are made of modular parts, and so they can replace parts that are broken. And then also there's a 96% recycling rate for the scooters as well. So really not too much is going into the landfill.
Yeah, great. Thanks for that. Looks like there's a bunch of questions in the chat, so
okay,
go on mute here.
Go ahead, Chuck.
Hey, Chuck.
Thanks, ADK. So when you're looking at the greenhouse gas emissions for the program, are you accounting for the maintenance vehicles that have to go by and replace batteries and pick them up and move them back? Or is this strictly the writing?
Yeah, that's strictly the writing at this point. And so it's based upon a 25% formula that 25% of all trips would have replaced a motor vehicle trip. And that was done by Lime, a study they did in 2019, which was a statistically significant study. And so we're using that number to come up with the eventual greenhouse gas savings on that.
Okay.
Lime does want to move to a net zero operation where they are using probably more electric vehicles and bikes to move scooters and batteries around, but we're not there quite yet.
Okay, thanks. And my perspective is that anything that gets people out of cars, which is by far the most hazardous method of transportation, is good overall for the city and for the people using the transit. Where I've seen vehicles, the scooters left lying on the ground is typically right at 28th Street. I think they go along, the brakes come on, it quits on them, and they go, and throw it down, right? But often I've seen them parked neatly as well. And so I think that there's a mix of frustration and people treating them as they should be treated. So I definitely would like to see it expand beyond east of 28th to west to 28th, where we get a lot more use. We'd have a lot more 0.5 uses per day.
Thanks a lot, Chuck. Ali, I want to make sure I respect your time here today. I know there's a lot of questions, and so if I can take more, I'm happy to do that. But if you want to send me the questions, I can also follow up with a response. So we'll leave that option open.
We have
GK, I am not in charge of the PRAB, so I'll refer to our chair, Pam, and she had it. Go for it, Pam.
Okay. Thanks.
No, because I want to say something, so I don't want to cut it short.
we still have Anita's questions are still in the chat too.
Yeah, I've got 3 questions from Anita. So what happens when someone when there's someone in a wheelchair, somebody with ADA issues, that can't cross, that can't pass, and because the scooter's in the way, what do you do? What
Yeah,
happens?
we've experienced that, that very situation. And well, we've had a couple of reports, but we know it's happened, you know, we can imagine it's happened more frequently than just a couple of reports we've got. You know, at this point, the wheelchair user is forced to contend with that scooter and has to make it move one way or another, whether knocking it over or just moving it to the side. They do roll. They are on kickstands. And so it's a great challenge, and it's one of the, I think the biggest challenges we have with the program. And so, you know, looking at how we can move to that designated parking program, I think is would alleviate at least most of the issues, but probably not all of them.
Okay, what are the age groups of most of the people using them? I saw.
Mhm. Oh, okay. So according to Lime and their questionnaire that they administered to their customers, 31 years old is the average age. And there are 25% above the age of 45.
Great, thank you. Are there discounts for low-income residents? If so, what are they?
Yes, Lime has a program called Lime Access, and folks can sign up with that. They have to show documentation, which can be a dissuasion in terms of signing up for it, or an obstacle. However, it's basically 50% off each ride. And so it comes down to about 7 cents a minute while you're on the scooter.
Great, thank you. And then how can you control the clutter around the city being left anywhere and everywhere?
Well, again, I think it's, you know, taking a little bit more action on the geofencing, and then getting back to, you know, relying on more of the designated parking areas. And so one approach might be if, so let's say we're looking at, you know, east of 28th Street in the zone we're currently in, it might be that we look at the activity centers, you know, where 29th Street Mall is, and we say, to have a free floating model might work pretty good here. But as we encroach into some of the neighborhoods, that's where we might want to have some more designated parking areas, so they don't end up on the sidewalk and sort of just kind of left everywhere. So working to bring a little bit more order to the overall program. B-Cycle, you know, of course, with its dock system, it doesn't have these same problems, and be working very well. So how can we make e-scooters work more like B-Cycle, if you can imagine that? But there's benefits, right? There's pros and cons, I should say, to having the dockless versus the docked model, and so we just have to work through and you know which is more appropriate where.
Sure. Okay, those were Anita's.
Thanks, Anita.
For me, DK, this is nothing personal. I just wanted to just say, because I told Allie, I said, because I'm really passionate. I don't like them. I don't like them at all. I think I'm a NIMBY. I don't want them in my backyard. I think our city is so beautiful, and I walk to Alpine Market probably 3 or 4 times a week, and I step over them. I'm walking over them. I see I've seen accidents. So what I want to ask you, DK, is how does an accident get reported? Because I noticed you only had 4. So what happens if, like, college kids are drinking and they get in an accident and they just walk away and they dump them? Is that reported? Like, can you track them? Do you have little sensors on the
You know, a lot of the crashes do get reported through Lime. Actually, they can recognize when their scooter has been in a crash and it's laying on its side for a period of time and idle. And other times people will also report it and say, I crashed a scooter. But a lot of the crashes that have been reported, there's about 13 reported crashes that were not serious. So there was a minor injury, like a twisted ankle. Right. And so the crash reports that I've shared with you, the 4 are severe injury crashes. Those are the ones that we're really most concerned about. If the police are called and an ambulance is coming, that person is incapacitated, that's a big red flag for us. And so those are the I guess, the most important crashes that we're tracking. But we'll admit that, yes, we do, there's got to be other crashes that have taken place on these that are unreported. I think that happens a lot with all kinds of modes, right? Whether you're on an e-scooter or you're on a
Sure.
bike, even if you're driving, I guess there's the insurance piece of that, but a lot of unreported incidents happen within the city, regardless of mode. But again, focusing on those severe injury collisions is what we're most concerned about.
Okay. Well, I thought your presentation was great and I liked how authentic it was. I appreciated the truth, having everything there. So, but I would totally support it if they had little stations. I just think it looks nicer.
Appreciate that input. Thank you.
Sure. Anyone else? Oh, Mary?
DK, I'm sorry if this was written in your report that you put in our agenda. I may have missed it. Why did the city you said the city council wanted to try stationless first? Why was that?
I think it was in the spirit of just true experimentation, not knowing, what challenges and benefits it could bring, or opportunities it could bring. And so when we follow up with our report back to city council, we can talk about, again, what those opportunities are and what those challenges, and then our recommendations, I should say, our proposed next steps for how we work towards continuous improvement.
And I just wanted to say for Anita, our member who her mute is not working. She also agrees with Pam that she's not a huge fan at this point.
I understand, and I take nothing personally on this at all, whatsoever. So we have a very non-biased position on this. We're collecting the data, we're getting the input, we're going to take it back and then present to our Transportation Advisory Board and our council our proposed next steps to formalize the program.
Perfect. And DK, just for the record, I need to read all of Anita's comments.
Oh, sure.
Okay, so just give me a second, please. I just need to go back up. If they are mostly used for recreation, why not have stations like bicycles? And you answered that. Plus all the accidents and inconveniences that are not reported. I agree with you, Pam. I'm not happy with them so far. And especially for the recording. I don't know what that means, Anita, but anyway, those are her comments. Let me know if I missed something, Anita. I think we might have gotten it. Oh, we're good. Okay, we're good. All right, great. We covered everything. Anyone else for DK? Well, thank you for coming. We appreciate it.
Thank you, board members. I really appreciate your time tonight. Thank you, Allie.
Great. Allie, do you want to introduce the next speaker?
I can do that. And in fact, I'm so excited because you mentioned that you haven't got to spend a lot of time with our new planning senior manager, Mark Davison. And so I am actually going to toss it straight to him because he's going to introduce the members of his team. We're going to go back in the agenda to our items for discussion. And I'm really glad that you get to see a couple of incredible concepts that were done in-house by our team. So I'll let Mark introduce his teammates and how they're going to handle this item. And specifically the PRAPS role in this item that we're consulting you on.
Thanks, Ali. Yeah, really excited about this item. It's North Boulder Park, and we want to talk about some of the community engagement that we've had over recent months, and also obviously input from PRAB. I think when I first started here, that was the initial input I heard from you anyway. And Doug's going to be leading this. He's our senior landscape architect, and he's going to be just talking you through the process that led to the alternatives you see tonight. And the input we're looking for is feedback on the two alternatives to understand, frankly, which one is preferred. And in all honesty, when you look at alternatives, there's often a mix and match between the two as well as we get to decision making. And with that, I'll pass you over to Doug.
Great, thank you, Mark. And I'm going to attempt to share my screen here. Okay, can everyone see my screen? It should be a Bluebeam PDF, excuse me. Okay, great. Thank you, Mark, and thank you, Allison. Just really quickly, as I was putting this presentation together this morning, I opened up an old template and from a past PRAB presentation, and the date on it was October 22nd, 2018. So almost 4 years to the day where I've done a formal presentation to the PRAB. I just thought that was funny. I've been so involved in the construction of the Boulder Reservoir and Scott Carpenter Park that I've done a lot of consent agenda items. This is the first time in quite a while that I've been able to present to PRAB, and definitely the first time I've had the opportunity to meet you guys virtually and talk with you. So I'm excited about that, and thank you. So tonight, as Mark said, I would like to go over with the PRAB a couple different alternatives that we have put together for the site plan out at North Boulder Park. I'm going to do the majority of the presentation, try and keep it to, a quick 7 to 10 minutes, hopefully, and then allow the majority of the time for, we do have some questions of the PRAB, and then just also if you have any questions and comments, for me. So just a quick presentation with some background analysis and review of the site plan called Concept Alternatives, questions, and then next steps. Oh, sorry, okay. So the project background. This project was originally supposed to happen in 2022, but due to some staffing capacity and the need to finish off some other projects, this is going to be a project that happens in 2023. And it is a park refurbishment, as you all know, and it's in the PRAB packet. The Parks Department does a refresh of park every year. That gives us an opportunity, especially out here at North Boulder Park, to go and replace playground equipment that has gone past its life cycle. And for North Boulder Park, that playground equipment was installed in the 1990s. And so it's reached the end of its life cycle, and we're at a point where probably past a point where we can't find replacement parts for the playground equipment out there, so it just needs to be replaced. A little bit of history: the original playground design for the project for the park was done in 1968. The shelter was actually installed in the 1950s, but the playground itself was in 1968. And it included different playground bays. That's this image right down here in the lower left-hand side. It had what they called playground bays, and they had a lot of wood structures in them for climbing. So that was a 1968 plan. In 1984, there was another refresh of the park that was done. And this refresh focused on including some fitness equipment. So if you're familiar with the park prior to 2014, this fitness equipment was immediately to the west, a little bit north and west of the shelter. And it was actually designed as fitness equipment for the disabled community. And so that's what this equipment is here on the left and right-hand side of this image. And this was the actual playground, the fitness equipment that was out there prior to 2014. In 2014, we came back and did some work out at North Boulder Park. And this was primarily the result of funding that we received as part of the 2011 capital improvement bond. That bond gave the department money to address critical infrastructure deficiencies and deferred maintenance items in our parks and recreation facilities. And so in 2014, one of the things that we did was remove this fitness equipment, but the major work that we did out there was addressing some pretty significant ADA, or Americans with Disabilities Act issues. So that funding allowed us to get into compliance with the ADA. And the majority of the work was focused on concrete work. It's really glitzy and glamorous, but concrete work right around the existing shelter. That being said, we did have the opportunity to do some outreach to the community and ask them, well, okay, we are here. What are some other things that we could do to make the park and playground area better? One of the things that we did was provide a new basketball court. We added a ping pong table out there, and we did provide some some poured in place or rubberized surfacing around one of the pieces of playground equipment to get better accessibility to that piece of playground equipment. And it is in 2014 where we also added the fitness equipment, which is to the south of the existing playground. At the time in 2014, we decided as a department or work group that the playground equipment that was out there at the time didn't necessarily need to be replaced. We knew that it was approaching the end of its useful life, but we decided that we wanted to focus on some of the other things out there because we knew that the cost to replace that equipment would be pretty large, and we wanted to focus on other things and then come back as part of a CIP to another CIP project to address the replacement of the playground equipment. So that is where we are right now. What I can say is for the 2023 plan, just generally the things that we want to focus on are, and this is, somewhat standard for a lot of the playground replacement projects that we do, but, obviously we want to make things, specific to North Boulder Park in this case. So we're going to provide accessible equipment that can be used by children aged 2 to 5 and 5 to 12, and for children of all physical and mental abilities. This is a great opportunity for us to introduce and incorporate nature-based play opportunities. And there's a variety of play equipment that we'll use focusing on the development of motor skills for all different ages. We heard from the community that shade was an important thing to incorporate out at the playground, either through, incorporated on the playground itself, the play equipment itself, shelters, or using trees. We are proposing to include area for teens and fitness equipment. We heard from the PRAB, and I would say that what we heard from the PRAB was also echoed by the community about the need to address some of the issues with the existing fitness equipment out there, and not necessarily get rid of it, but find better, find more appropriate equipment and find a better place for it. One of the things that we're also doing are shelter renovations to the existing shelter. There were some things that we were able to do in 2022 to the shelter, such as fix the roof, do some repainting. But we also have the opportunity, and something that we're going to do is make the existing restrooms year-round restrooms, and make those universal restrooms as well. And then just lastly, in terms of history, in 2018, we did install a small bike top track to the north and a little bit east of the existing playground. And that was made possible by some funding that came through and some artwork that actually wasn't installed, but we were able to do this top track because of that funding opportunity. Okay, so this is the dry slide that I have, and apologies for all of the words, but just getting into the the analysis, the meats and bones of the project. So, and how we arrived at the decisions that we did. So initially, I'll say the focus for this project was the replacement of that existing playground equipment, and it still is. However, as we got more engaged in the planning for the project and the public engagement that we went through, we realized that it needed to be more and wanted to be more than just a playground replacement. And so in addition to some of the comments and feedback that we were getting from the public, we also knew that we had a new updated master plan, as well as ongoing planning associated with the implementation of the Alpine Balsam area plan that really made us want to take a more holistic or comprehensive look at the areas around the playground and around the shelter, and not just to limit ourselves to the playground replacement itself. As an example for the Alpine Balsam plan and how that kind of came into play, if you look at the area plan for Alpine Balsam, one of the things that it says is that the level of service, if with the increase in population because of this future development, the levels of service aren't really impacted. However, given the heavy use that the park and playground see right now, it was recommended that we consider providing additional amenities at the park. And so I think that's you'll see is reflected in the alternatives, the site plan alternatives that we've come up with. So again, for these reasons, we develop site plans that go beyond the limits of the playground. They incorporate natural elements and natural play opportunities, outdoor fitness, opportunities for teen-friendly activities and gathering, and an expanded shelter space. So for community feedback, this was a two-part process to solicit feedback on user preferences for playground themes and styles. We had an online questionnaire that we put out to the public, and we also had 2 in-person meetings. In those in-person meetings, we had what we just called a kid-friendly questionnaire that we allowed the playground users to fill out during one of those 2 sessions. And I think we had a pretty good turnout and a lot of really good feedback that we got from both the online questionnaire as well as the 2 in-person public meetings. I'd say that there was consistency in feedback from the online questionnaire results and comments, the in-person meetings, staff, and what we heard from the PRAB. So across all of those different opportunities for feedback, I would say that there were very consistent themes that we heard. And ultimately, this feedback was used in the development of the 2 site plan alternatives for North Boulder Park. So I will take just a second or 2 to go over a summary of the questionnaire. This was in your it was in your PRAB packet, excuse me. Natural playground elements or natural materials received high level of interest. Natural materials are preferred for the play environment. There was a high level of interest from everyone for water play opportunities. Moving and manipulating the play environment also received a lot of interest. Opportunities for climbing ranked very high. As we hear with during a lot of our public outreach and engagement, that regular swings are always a must. They're used by both age groups, 2 to 5 and 5 to 12, and older than that as well. The teenagers use the swings quite a bit too. We did hear that there is a want or need or desire for a wider variety of swing types. So that's something that we looked at as well. High level of interest in tall slides, being able to climb up high, and slide. Shade, as we always know, is very critical when we think about playground redesigns. An interesting one that I found was, so that we always provide or try to provide 2 to 5 and 5 to 12 playground equipment. One of the things that we heard was that in that 2 to 5 age range, that the kids are really looking for a wider variety of experiences in that age range. They outgrow a lot of that. Even on the younger end of that, they outgrow that 2 to 5 stuff and start to migrate to the 5 to 12. And I think honestly that's probably a lot of what we saw out at North Boulder Park, with kids going over and using the fitness equipment that is immediately adjacent to the playground. So I think that's what's going on there. And I found that to be an interesting comment that came back during our engagement. We heard that the pea gravel has to go. I think that that's consistent from the public to our operations staff. It is just a really big maintenance nightmare to have to deal with replacing that surfacing or maintaining that over a period of time. Fitness equipment is a safety concern for kids and should be removed. We did hear from the public as well as the PRAB that while there are safety concerns, that some of the equipment out there is used, primarily the stationary equipment is used. And so what I think we heard and what we learned is that we don't want to wholesale get rid of the fitness equipment out there, but that there are better options for fitness equipment out there. And I think the other challenge is to find a good location for it. We did have some comments about not necessarily wanting to put something new right back in that same location. And I would agree. I don't necessarily think that makes sense. It's just a matter of finding the correct and the best space for new equipment. And so, yeah, that's that last bullet point down there. And then just some fun drawings from the kids that we got over on the right-hand side here. Like I said, we did do a kid-friendly questionnaire during our in-person sessions, and we provide a lot of the same imagery that was in the regular questionnaire. Circle what you'd love to see in your playground, and then we gave them an opportunity to just draw what they would like to have in their playground. And I think a lot of what you just heard me kind of cover in the summary is very apparent in these drawings, and these are select images, but I would say that the other ones are very consistent with what you're seeing here too. So that was a lot of fun and a good 4 or 5 hours that myself and one of the other planning staff got to spend out with the kids and other playground users in July. I'm actually going to go through these two slides here pretty quickly. This was just these are the two concept alternatives that we provided in your PRAB packet, alternative A and then alternative B. And go to this slide here. One of the benefits of having the agenda kind of jumbled around a little bit, it gave me a chance to kind of go over my presentation in my head a little bit. And I realized that I would love to have these two plans side by side. So they're a little bit small, but I think as I get into this next point, it's probably a little bit more helpful to have them side by side so you can start to see where some of the similarities or where some of the differences are in this plan. So if you do have any questions about what some of the numbers are, again, it's in as the attachments E and F in your PRAB packet, or I can quickly try and go over that or cover that as well, or find that out for you as well. So generally in both the plans, you have active and passive areas, and within the active areas, you have the space for the 2 to 5 playground. And that is primarily the area that is the large area just to the west or the immediate east of the shelter. So in concept A, it's here, and concept B, obviously same location. We tried to keep the same footprint that the playground currently is in. It did increase in size a little bit down here on the south side to accommodate as much as we can. We were trying to accommodate what we heard from the playground users and the public and the PRAB. And so as I'm sure you all know, playground equipment just takes up a lot of space, especially when you provide some of the swings. And so it did increase the size of the playground slightly in this area, but I think that we are able then to not change it dramatically, but provide a lot more of what we heard the community wanted. And the other thing is that I think we were able to do so without impacting a lot of the mature trees that are out at North Boulder Park. We realize and recognize what a tremendous asset those trees are for the park. And so anything that we can do to work in around the trees and not impact them, that was definitely what we were going for. Especially we know that they provide such great opportunities for shade, and there's not much better that you can do for shade than trees. So we're trying to minimize those impacts. Similarly to, you know, a lot of our playground designs, part of our design standard manuals, the things we like to provide are climbing, sliding, balancing, opportunities for bouncing, interacting with other playground users. So I think a lot of the equipment that you see in both of these alternatives accomplish that. We also have opportunities for sand play and free play materials and swings. Free materials, if you don't know, you know, we're considering that just, you know, do we have the opportunity to bring some loose materials like sticks or logs out to the playground? So, you know, giving kids an opportunity to just build a small fort, or, you know, just interact with the playground materials maybe in a different way, something that's not quite so prescribed as some of the playground equipment that we have. I think the big differences, if you will, between the actual playground areas, the 2 to 12 playground areas between these plans, are that in alternative A, and it doesn't necessarily come across in the plan, but you can see in some of the imagery that the equipment is more standard, if you will, similar to what you see in a lot of our playgrounds, more metal, plastic. And in alternative B, what you're seeing is more natural wood materials for the main playground pieces. And I will just say that we wanted to put both options and alternatives out there in terms of the materiality of that playground equipment to get feedback from the PRAB. The feedback that we got, as you saw from the community, I think is there is a preference to having more, you know, wherever possible, more natural materials. And so I think that's what you're seeing, what we tried to provide in alternative B. Okay, the next area is water play features. So in both alternatives, we did provide some opportunities for water play. In concept A, this is the area with the 10 next to it up in the upper right, left-hand corner of the playground. And then in alternative B, it's this area 11 down here, kind of in the area where that existing play or fitness equipment is. We do recognize that the use of water is, you know, we need to be very sensitive with the use of water in, you know, if we are going to do something like including a water play feature. What we're talking about here is nowhere near close to the splash pad that you see out at Scott Carpenter Park. The idea is that this is all, you know, similar, more in line with, I would say, what you're seeing in on the Pearl Street Mall with small pop jets, low volume water pop jets, or even something like misters. They do have equipment out there that is, you know, that are just misters and not even as high volume as what you'd see from the pop jets. A lot of the vendors that do provide water play equipment have the option of smart controllers, which you can dial in the amount of the duration of the use, and that is definitely something that we would want to take advantage of if we, you know, do move forward with water play at North Boulder Park. So again, just highlighting, we do understand the sensitivity for, you know, water use with water play features. The other active area is the fitness area. In alternative A, the fitness area is shown to the north and west of the existing shelter, and that's this layout here at number 11. And what we're showing here is that the type of equipment, if you look at the proposed materials on the actual sheets in your PRAB packet, is something more along the lines of what you'd see for parkour. It's kind of a Ninja Warrior obstacle course type features. And the reason I included this is because of my conversations that I've had with Growing Up Boulder and some, you know, research that I've done that says, you know, if you want to, we're trying to make this as multi-purpose and multi-use as possible. And one of the, you know, teens do actually have an interest in this type of fitness equipment. And so we wanted to get, the PRAB's thoughts on, Ninja Warrior, parkour type equipment. For that reason, it's also something that we would, think would be used by, the public for adults as well to a certain extent. In alternative B, what you're seeing is a fitness area shown to the immediate north of the existing shelter. And this fitness equipment is what I've learned through conversations with our recreation staff is considered to be more functional equipment. I had to ask them, I had no idea what the difference was, but this type of equipment is what you would find is the more stationary type equipment, the pull-up bars, the benches. And unlike the parkour, where you're probably only going to want to have one person on it at a time, this does give you the opportunity to have multiple people on this functional equipment. Maybe a little bit less appealing for teens, but would still have an interest. I think they would still be interested in it.
Can you zoom in so we can see when because it's so small on the screen?
I will try to.
Thank you.
Let me try this. I know I can do it this way. It's going to get a little
Thank you very
pixelated.
much.
Yeah, it's
Thank
going to get a
you.
little pixelated, but I can definitely do that. And what I would say is that you're probably going to see better information on the two attachments E and F that I sent in that are in the PRAB packet. Those are those actually have 3D images or just regular pictures of what I'm talking about right here. And I can pull those up once I finish the presentation so you can have a better idea of what I'm talking about. What I will say is I actually think that we can accomplish both things in terms of having equipment that's appealing and interesting to adults as well as appealing and interesting to teens by just working with the vendors. I think that we can still get this functional equipment that adults might use more and have opportunities for incorporating some of the independent pieces from the parkour, Ninja Warrior type stuff that would still be that would appeal more to the teens. So I think it's that this one truly is just being able to work with our vendor a little bit more about speccing the right type of equipment that goes out there. I think one of the, regardless, I think one of the great things is that, this equipment gives us the opportunity to accomplish one of the things that we heard in the master plan is providing more outdoor recreation fitness space. And I think, our recreation staff would be very excited about having this type of equipment out there because it does give them the opportunity to program this much more obviously than than is done with the equipment that's out there right now. So that's something that I think is really appealing. Okay. So that's the fitness area. Just quickly, the passive recreation areas would be the shelter and the berms or open space. And for the shelter, I think what we are trying to do in both of these alternatives is make a better outdoor shelter space, an expanded shelter space that gives, capitalizes on views out to the Flatirons, which are, down, this way, gives, some better visibility, if you will, to the diamond fields out there. So those, what we can do in that regard is the same for both. And I think it's just going to be a little bit more exploration exactly, what this looks like. I think what you're seeing here is, providing some shade with the shelter, but we could also provide additional barbecues and picnic tables out there to enhance that outdoor shelter space. Let's see. As I said, for the shelter, we're going to be providing renovations to the restrooms to make them year-round. And we've already done some other things to the shelters, some other improvements to the shelter. And then almost there, but the berms and the open turf areas, we think that, you know, obviously berms have they kind of serve a dual purpose. There's definitely a play value to having berms. Kids love to roll and sled down berms, and so that's an opportunity for us to, you know, think about how can we incorporate more natural elements or nature-based elements into our designs. And so berms are always berms are always an interest to, you know, kids and other playground users. One of the things that we are looking at, it's going to just take a little bit more work with, you know, working with some of our civil engineers, but, you know, do we have the opportunity to incorporate berms and help out with some drainage? We know from talking with our operations staff that there are a lot of drainage issues at North Boulder Park. We experience drainage issues with, you know, light to moderate and obviously heavy rainfall events, but, you know, the water comes down off of Dellwood, comes into the park and actually washes away a lot of the playground surfacing material that we have in here. And so we started to think about, you know, are there opportunities to incorporate berms to help deal with that? And so that's going to take a little bit more work and investigation to figure out exactly how this can work. I've had some preliminary conversations with the civil engineer, and, you know, what we're showing here definitely doesn't have, there are no fatal flaws or deal breakers. It's just a matter of, you know, getting into the nitty gritty of, you know, okay, well, how high does that berm have to be to accomplish what you want? Or are we going to go into the existing storm sewer? So way into the weeds there, but I think that, you know, with a little more investigation, you know, we can figure out if we have the opportunity to incorporate berms to, again, both help out with drainage, but also add some play value out at the park. And then the last area of the plans, it doesn't necessarily show up as a number on the plans, if you will, but we want to include teen spaces, teen-friendly spaces out at North Boulder Park. We believe that we heard that this was, you know, a want, a need, and a necessity from, you know, the update to the master plan. It's echoed through a lot of the work that Growing Up Boulder has done with us over the years. And so on your sheets, you see that there are some opportunities or ideas that we believe through, again, talking with Growing Up Boulder, have the opportunity or have the opportunity to be interesting play spaces or gathering spaces for teens in the community. So, okay. So I do that's the majority of the presentation. I did want to take, sorry if I went a little over time there, but we do have some questions that I had put together for the PRAB that we'd love to get your comments and feedback on, as well as take any questions from you. And so I think, you know, Allison, if you're all right, or Chair, if you're okay with it, Jack, I'd just like to pose some of these questions to the PRAB. And starting off with the active play areas for the 2 to 5 and 5 to 12 playground is, does the PRAB have a preference or any comments on the type of playground equipment that should be included in the playground replacement?
Doug, before we start, would you mind if I just read Anita's questions on the side first before we go into that? Because if
Sure.
It's going to be too complicated for me to transcribe both.
Yep, absolutely.
Okay, thank you. So Anita, her question is, can you please let us know how you asked the community, how and when was the outreach done? Was it done by flyers, links to a site? If so, where were they placed? Was any type of communication translated into Spanish? Second question is, I'm very concerned about the universal restrooms. Could we add a family restroom for families, adults with children? And then the third question is, any consideration for adding a zip line like at Niwot or Lions Park?
Okay.
And if you're gonna,
these are in the chat, so I'm gonna go off of those.
Sure, of course.
So how we ask the community for feedback. We, as I said, we did online surveys, and we did 2 in-person meetings. We did a half-mile notification with postcards letting people know about the online survey. And on the postcards, we let them know as well about the 2 in-person meetings that we were going to be having. All of the information was put online, and the meetings and the online survey were flyered in the park. I can't say that I know specifically where the flyers went up. I know they were around, in and around the shelter and around the playground. I don't know that we went so far as to place anything on the southern part of the park, but I know that they were in and around the shelter and around the playground. So yes, there were flyers. Yes, there were links to the website. And I'll also add that, we are in the process of actually getting these plans online as well to get feedback on these 2 plans as well. And I believe that the plan is to keep those up through the 7th of November to get comments and feedback. And, similar to how we're taking comments from the PRAB, we'll take the comments from the feedback and, as we're able to incorporate those into that feedback into the next into the final plan that we put together. Was any type of, were flyers translated into Spanish? This was a time we did not do that. We did not translate these ones into Spanish. Concern about the universal restrooms. Can we add a family restrooms for families, adults with children? That's something that I think we can look into. I think it's probably a matter of how much space we have. But I think that's something that I'll need to look into with our operations staff and see exactly, what's involved in providing a family restroom. I think that the idea with the universal restrooms is that they're not gender specific, so a family could use those restrooms.
Doug, I wonder if I could jump in here and just maybe clarify what that is, I believe, and tell me if I'm wrong. What I believe is being explored here is when people hear universal restrooms, maybe they pick an open, one door you go in and everyone is in there. What I believe is outlined for the North Boulder Park shelter is that they would be a facility that is open for whoever chooses to use it, regardless their gender, family status, whatever. You go in, you lock the door, there's a sink, there's a toilet, and there will be one that is ADA accessible. Is that accurate?
I would say that's accurate, and maybe it's just, I know I use the term universal and maybe I'm not using it correctly. It's meant to be, very similar to the public restrooms that we now have over at Scott Carpenter. Some of the restrooms that we have at the Boulder Reservoir, where you're able to go in, and they're very similar to what we have at those 2 facilities, and we say that there are these types of amenities in there in one restroom, and this different types of amenities in another restroom. So yeah.
Doug, there was a question about, can we look for November 7th, consider translating into Spanish the alternatives, which I think would be possible.
Yes, absolutely. Yes. Was there any consideration for adding a zip line like the one at Niwot and Lyons? I would say it is definitely something that we heard a lot of positive feedback on. I know that, growing up Boulder, every time they do outreach for this type of, playground work, they always get comments about want and need for zip lines. For this park, it really boiled down to a matter of size. Zip lines take up a lot of space. And so we quickly ran out of space out there, and it was one of those cases where, again, we didn't want to necessarily take up a lot of open turf areas, because we know that those open turf areas are also used by the public. There's a lot of I think there's a Nordic group that uses the area out there, so we were trying to be cognizant of the space that they use as well. I think it's something that we can absolutely continue to explore, but again, we just need to be careful about the amount of space that it takes up.
Okay, thank you, Doug. You can proceed with your questions.
Okay. And I can certainly follow up with any of those things if I didn't answer them appropriately. So yeah, I think the first question that we had for the PRAB was in regard to the 2 to 5 and 5 to 12 playground space, and if there were any comments or preference on the material used for the majority of the structures, and primarily it usually boils down to the larger 2 to 5 or 5 to 12 playground structures. Is there a preference for wood or metals and plastic, which again is how we've shown them in alternative B and alternative A, respectively.
Anyone? My preference is wood.
Okay.
Go ahead, Chuck.
I agree.
Yeah. I agree. with both
Agree
of you.
too.
I think natural materials would be definitely preferred. I didn't see in your selection of play structure types that you had. By the way, I love the outreach and having the kids circle all the things they like to look at, especially like the kids that circled every one of them.
Yeah, every
I
single
want
one.
all of these, yeah, because they're really cute. Didn't see any examples of tunnels, for example. I think those would be very popular, and I don't know if you can incorporate that into natural play areas. The other thing was it'd be great to have more benches for adults to sit on while their kids are playing. And I know there was a lot of comment about, I think because of your July outreach, we need more shade, everything gets hot. And I wonder if there's some opportunities, for example, in the space just to the east of the shelter. There's some small trees or bushes. I wonder if there's space there for a larger shade tree that could grow and shade the playground better.
Okay.
Right next to number 10 there on that, just to the west of number 10.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you have two small trees, but they're not providing any shade to the play structures. And the other place you might look for more shade is between the diamond field and the sidewalk on the south edge. If there's a little strip of
Yes,
grass
right
in there. Yeah, I wonder if there's opportunity for more shade there, because that's really exposed to the southern sun in the summer. And I just like to see more shade everywhere in any of these alternatives.
Great, thank you.
Could I ask you to read all the questions you're going to ask so I can know when mine will slot in, please?
Sure. Let me just scroll down here again. So we just went over preference on playground materiality. The next set of questions I have are around active play, which is in the outdoor fitness areas. Does the PRAB have a preferred location for the fitness equipment as shown in either concept A or B? Does the PRAB have a preference for the type of fitness equipment, obstacle course, which is shown in alternative A, or functional fitness, which is in alternative B? I will add to that one, that particular question. Like I said during the presentation, I do feel like this is an area where I believe it truly is just working with a vendor to figure out the most appropriate type of equipment out there. And I think that can be a blend between, obstacle course type stuff and more functional fitness equipment. And then teen-friendly spaces, does PRAB have any comments or questions about providing teen-friendly spaces? So those are the only questions that I had for PRAB. And so we can.
Pamela, can I?
Of
go?
course.
So, Doug, I don't want to blindside you with this comment. However, it has been really a hope of mine in my tenure on the PRAB to push the understanding that we have an aging population. And I feel a little shocked that there is not more talk of and kind of query to the middle and older age population. I mean, obviously we're not going to kick the kids out and we're not going to make it a grown-up park only, but it seems a real miss in 2022
Thank
to
you, Fred.
be passing by that opportunity. And I could say more, but I just wanted to know why, integrating older people from, 40s and up, given what we know about Boulder's population, was not looked at. Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate the comments, and it's, definitely not something we are, specifically trying to avoid in coming up with the, with the alternatives. I have heard, through, just research that there is a little bit of overlap, with the, some of the fitness equipment, or with individuals that use the fitness equipment out there and the age ranges that equipment can span. I have heard that there is some overlap in that, and the age ranges or groups of people that can use that fitness equipment. But I do think it, you are correct. It is something that we can, and should definitely be more careful of when we're looking at these designs. And I think it's something I can go back and, see if there are ways of integrating that into these plans.
And then
Mark, I don't know
also,
if you wanted to add anything to that or.
go ahead.
Yeah, no, I'd just say, well, the other aspect of it, isn't it, Doug, is there's also potential for programming out there in the gathering spaces that would deal with a wider age range. We also find with nature play compared to standard play equipment that grandparents and adults interact with their young as opposed to kind of sitting separately, because there's an active interaction there that can happen, which is also helpful from a mental and physical perspective. And the reality here is it is a replacement project, not a new project, which is why Doug is sort of focused in on that replacement scope, which was really with the play area and then considering the fitness equipment.
Chuck?
So,
Oh, sorry, Mary, go ahead.
well, I feel like for me that conversation isn't entirely over. I just, using the word play can reference someone from, toddler to the cradle to grave, as we nurses say. And so just even as you're presenting it, Doug, I mean, not to be all, walking on eggshells, but just as we're all trying to use inclusive jargon, kids and teens and play like that makes play in a kind of a narrow channel, and we all want to play and we all want to interact together in different ways. And so I encourage for both this project a re-looking at it, as well as any future projects, which I've been saying for 4.5 years, which is that you also do the kind of outreach that you've done to older people, because I think honestly, some people don't know what they don't know. If they were given the opportunity, I'd have loved to weigh in on that and say some of the fun thing. I love South Boulder Rec Center because you got all those cool, they're stationary, ways that you can exercise as an adult. And there's a lot of people out there almost all the time, except for when I walk at 10 p.m. There's always grown-ups working out on that stuff. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mary. Chuck?
Mary, that's a really, really good point, and I definitely appreciate it, seeing as I've now surpassed the age of 60. And I would, in that vein, I would definitely push toward more functional fitness rather than, obstacle course, ninja kind of stuff. For those of you who aren't familiar with North Boulder Park, I live a block away from it, so it's my park, right? There are yoga classes going on in surrounding this area. There's this group of Latino women who come out and do exercise and then go running up and down the alleys. And there's people put up, the ropes and do the high wire stuff. And then there's a group of circus performers kind of, that come out and practice circus skills on Fridays evenings. There's volleyball all weekend. There's ultimate frisbee games going on. It's just an amazing park. There's the skiing in winter that goes loops all around the park. And so this really serves a huge variety of people and all different kinds of demographics in both age and culture. So I think it's really important to make sure all those voices are heard, not just for this playground replacement, which I think is great and on the right track, but for the broader uses of the park, especially as we move forward with Alpine Balsam. I imagine that there'll be more substantial conversations about renovations and changes to the park moving forward. But I think you're headed the right direction here with a lot of these, with providing space for teens, but also providing fitness equipment and other gathering places that, as Mary said, older people can use and feel welcomed and have things to do that engage them. Thank you.
Thank you, Chuck. Mary, I appreciate you bringing that up too, because this is my park too. So this is my home park. I live down the street from this park as well as Chuck. And but my comments were, and I'm 50. So what I do is that is my track. So I was one of the comments that I like the mile marker idea, you know, to put up there for me, you know, counting and, you know, maybe some educational things around, you know, the park would be great. And I like the functional fitness as well. And my idea for shade, I really don't want more structures in the park. I was wondering, is there any way we could advocate for more mature trees to be built, to be put in as shade instead? Because I was thinking about the hacky sackers too, Chuck. I love seeing the hacky sackers in summertime and their wire things. I think that's really cool.
I think any opportunities that we have for introducing, you know, more landscaping with trees is, you know, definitely appropriate. I mean, just in this plan, it's only 2 admittedly, but, you know, proposing some new trees down here in this area is what I'm, you know, it doesn't show up. I didn't call them out specifically, but getting some new plantings down in this area to provide, you know, more shade, you know, for whatever we do on the, you know, for this expanded shelter area.
Sure.
I do think, you know, we can look at opportunities for getting some shade trees down in here. I think the one thing trees are the best at providing shade. It's just that they do take a while to grow. Even, you know, mature trees, we really don't, you know, working with our forestry staff, we typically don't put in anything over a 2 to 2.5 inch caliber tree. Just because they have a tendency not to grow well after that. And this is actually a pretty challenging site to grow trees on. There were 2 trees when we did the renovation back in 2014. There were 2 trees that we put on a berm out here that didn't make it. So it can be a little bit rough of an area. But, you know, yes, I think any opportunity that we have to use trees to provide shade is something that we want to take advantage of for sure. So we'll continue to look at opportunities to provide more shade trees out there.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Anyone else? Jason? No? Okay.
Yeah. I do just want to make sure if at all possible to get some feedback from the PRAB on if there's a preferred area for the location of the fitness equipment. So again, in these 2 alternatives, one fitness area is shown to the north and west of the shelter. And I will say, well, actually, we talked about it, or I mentioned it in the presentation earlier. This is actually the location where the 1984 fitness equipment was installed. And again, when we came in 2014, we removed that, and it's just an open turf area right now. And I do understand from talking with members of the community that this area does get very well used, primarily because it is well shaded with these trees right here. But there are, you know, there are meetups out here. I think there's a couple of yoga classes that meet out here. And so I do want to be careful and get PRAB's feedback and, you know, the community's feedback on, you know, putting something like fitness equipment in that area. And then so there is this option and this other alternative for providing it to the north of the shelter. But again, this does now, again, as you see, start to eat into some existing open turf area, which does get used as well. So just curious if there are any thoughts on the location for the fitness equipment.
Hey, Doug, can you tell me where 9th Street is?
9th is here,
Okay.
and this is Delwood up top.
Okay. Allie, do you know where the when I'm walking, I see this bike tour people, the e-bikes, they park like the big fat tire e-bike tour. They park somewhere around here, right? They don't, I feel like they're right next to the proposed A fitness area.
I'm not aware of any e-bike providers with a commercial use permit in that park and haven't seen them. I wonder if, I'm usually there at 6:30 in the morning or 5 o'clock at night for Little League. And I haven't seen that. The spaces where I could see them doing it, I'm moving my mouse like you all can see my mouse. You can't.
Okay.
There's a large concrete pad just north of the Little League field, and that's,
Yes.
I would guess
Okay.
it's right there.
That's where they meet. Thank you. Thank you.
Is there any reason that we can't have both the parkour and the, I mean, I know that's not either of these designs, but and the stationary equipment?
I mean, I don't have, I don't believe that there's any reason why we couldn't, short of, just being careful of the budget for the project. And making sure that we get comments and feedback from the community on it. But I don't believe that there's, any reason why there couldn't be those two spaces. Other than, and I mean, we're getting into just taking up more of the open turf out there, which I want to be careful of that, just because it is usable space just for open play, playing tag, and granted, there's a lot of open space at North Boulder Park, admittedly, but these areas in particular where we would be showing them, they are used. So, but yeah.
And Chuck, did you have a comment?
I thought there were lots of comments from the public about trying to keep the adult exercise equipment away from the playground, and I think that's very good advice. If you want to avoid having small kids jump on stuff and potentially get hurt. So I would suggest keeping adult equipment over where 11 is on option A. I think, speaking to Mary's point about having both parkour and adult fitness equipment, the parkour takes up a lot of space. And I think you could have any two of the three of teen gathering space, adult exercise equipment, and parkour, but I don't think you can have all three, probably, without a big expansion of the program. And regarding the e-bikes, I think that they tend to gather in the parking area and the 7th and Delwood, and they usually park on the street.
Okay.
But they begin their tours from that corner. And they have one at 10:30 and one at 1:30.
Yeah, I love watching them come up 4th Street. It says 2 participants raised the hand. Is that so? There's Chuck. I don't see the second person. Jason, Mary, Sunny. Anita gave a questions already. Elliot, nothing. So do you feel like you got enough information from us, Doug, or did we not answer your last question that you asked?
No,
specifically?
you've definitely given a lot of great feedback. I appreciate it. Again, leaving the opportunity open for any more questions, from the PRAB for me or other members of staff. But then if not, then the next steps really are to move to completing a final site plan based on the feedback today and any feedback that we get from the community once we get this up online. And then in first quarter next year, the plan is to develop our construction documents off of the the site plan that we put together and go into the construction phase, and then hope and have the park open to the public in the fourth quarter of 23.
That's fantastic. What a great presentation.
Could you please, Doug, just read Anita's last comment when you get a minute? Thanks.
Yes, I will.
She's double
Yes.
clicking on the preference to separate the adult equipment from youth equipment.
Yeah,
Got it. Yeah.
100% agreed to have the adult equipment further away from the playground. Kids play there and parents often don't supervise them. It would make parents' lives easier. Thank you.
Agreed.
And
Yeah, and I
she
would say that's
also,
very consistent with what we heard from obviously the PRAB, but when we did our online surveys and in-person meetings. So sorry.
I'm gonna put her other comments. And Anita prefers natural materials as well. They are least toxic. Her preference is the obstacle course, and she would like to see a lot more benches.
Thank you. One of the, I absolutely will, look at more opportunities for benches. I think one of the things that doesn't come through necessarily in these 3D plans, or I'm sorry, 3D plans, in these the two-dimensional plans is, I think we are looking, wherever possible to incorporate, rocks, and where necessary or where we need them, small seat walls. And so anything from a rock to a seat wall can be used as a bench, but definitely we'll, look at more opportunities to provide bench seating out there too. So. Great. All right, well, that's all I had for the presentation, but if there are any other comments, please do let us know. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Doug.
Great. With that, we'll move on to matters from the board members. And our first one is PRAB retreat planning. So Jason, do you have a update for us?
I'm sorry, Madam Chair, we had one more item from the department. If the item on the capital investment strategy update, that item is.
I apologize.
It's
apologize.
presented by members of the BPR team, so we left that one as is on the agenda.
I got myself confused. I thought, okay, sorry about that.
No worries. As long as we can do it, we're all good.
Yeah, absolutely. In it to win it.
And they'll be brief. They're very streamlined and ready to roll. This item is going to be covered by your new best friend, Mark Davison, BPR Planning Manager.
Thank you, Ali. And yeah, I was trying to track it myself. It's a bit like pin the donkey with the agenda tonight. So pin the tail of the donkey. Yeah, I'll dive in and I'll keep this brief because I know we're a little bit behind tonight. But let me just share my screen. Hopefully that's coming up for everybody. Great. So tonight we're just going to chat about the idea of updating our capital improvement strategy for the department. And I'm going to cover three main topics: what that approach will look like, how our emerging asset management system will feed into that strategy. I'll just drop in on a few projects we're thinking about in 23-24 that have kind of been approved by PRAB in 23, and then ones we're looking at in 24. And then at the end, I'll just talk about next steps in terms of the schedule for PRAB's involvement. Just first off, before I dive in, I want to also acknowledge Ali's role and Jackson Height, our Senior Business Services Manager, who've supported this and have basically worked with me on the presentation tonight. So the first topic to cover is our idea of updating this capital investment approach. The reason I say update is, as PRAB members may be aware, the last time we did this was 2016, where we looked out from then till 2026. And a question you might ask is, why are we doing this in 22? Should we not be waiting till 2026? And there's a couple of reasons. One is, you'll see in the next slide, we're looking at a little bit of catch up in terms of our capital investment program. We've got a little bit behind on a few projects. I'll explain the reasons. And then there's other factors that have come into play and emerged since 2016 that make us want to look at our long-term investment and work with PRAB on what that looks like. So yeah, I say 2020, in fact, it's really 2019 with a few projects like the Boulder Creek Management Plan, Violet Park, Pearl Street, Civic Area. We're really hoping to have started those a few years ago, but at this point, we're really thinking about how we move them forward in the next few years. And you can see there, why are we behind? I've listed a few bullets describing that. I would point out a major one is the COVID slowdown. That also, frankly, led to delays in the deployment of our Beehive, our asset management system. And then there's more pragmatic items, like we've had delays with permitting on projects and it doesn't just slow that particular project, it then has a knock-on effect with other projects. And then some of the emergent items that make us also want to rethink our approach in 2022, 23 is that first bullet, major cost escalations. We're seeing 50, 60, 70% overruns on the way projects have originally been budget estimated compared to when we're having to send out, for instance, moving towards construction. And that's not just us, it's across the city and it's across the US. The good news is in the third bullet, I'm happy to announce, and we'll be introducing these folk tiers. We've recently hired 2 senior landscape architects to support this work. And that means we can actually hopefully accelerate some of those projects we're behind on. And then the last bullet probably is the critical one. We've got policy guidance from our 22 master plan, which I'll get to in a moment and explain a bit about what that means. So to talk about what a capital investment strategy is, it's really informed by 3 items. It is that master plan, and the detail on that I'll get to in a minute. It's also this asset management program, which you've heard about, Beehive. It started 3 years ago. We've made some great progress. We want to move into a phase 2. And again, I'll chat about that more on other slides. And then there's current planning efforts that inform how we think about our sort of long-term capital investment strategy and also our short-term. And the great example is Doug tonight talking about a site plan for North Boulder Park. That gets to some of the detail in terms of the investment strategy compared to some of the higher scale master plan information we use. And then what we're hoping is, as we come back to you in 2023 and have more involvement with PRAB and input from you, will be sort of 3 focus areas. It is, what is that long-term investment strategy? What are the details in terms of the projects we want to really move forward in 23, 24, partially moving into 25? And the reason I say detail is, as you know, the long-term investment strategy, the more you go out to 29, the less certainty is on the types of projects you're doing. So you have to know where you want to go, but you also have to have more detail for the projects in front of you. And then the third point is really to understand what projects we're deferring and if there's maintenance backlog. And that's generally like an underfunded need, and how could we fund those? And I'll get to that in a moment. So what you're seeing here is you're going to see 2 slides from the master plan. It's towards the back end of the master plan, and it really gets into describing CIP projects that the master plan is specifically guiding us on to, frankly, implement over the next few years. So the good news is we've got a really good start in our investment strategy. The reason I've highlighted the red box is that that's fiscally constrained. And what that means is that's our current level of funding for projects. And the reason I say that and highlight that is sort of gives an example of how much we can do on a project. In terms of action and vision, this is where we really have to be a little bit more innovative. If we can get more funding for whatever reason into the department from our traditional funding sources, that's great. But if you look at wider revenue streams, there's traditional approaches like grants. For instance, Violet Park has $750,000 Land and Water Fund grant to help support that project, which can move it towards action. And then other examples are thinking about sort of more innovative approaches. For instance, at the moment, you see there in the plan alternatives, we're looking at playgrounds. How can we work with local groups to help fund those who have stakeholders in the park itself? And then the other idea is really thinking about, for instance, when we're looking at the court study, the third line item here in facilities funding and focus areas. And that would be working with, say, the pickleball and the tennis community together to say, hey, can you help us move us to some of the action and vision aspects of these projects through like a public-private partnership on those. I'd also mentioned the recreation centers have come up. That's something we'll be discussing more with you in 2023, but as they come to the end of their life cycle, is the private business partnerships we can do along with public funding to think about how we can do replacement of those large facilities which have a large cost associated with them. So in terms of the budget itself, this is kind of what we'll be looking at in 2023, working with PRAB. We've really got 35 million in our CIP, and you can see here how it's currently allocated. And the good news is, in terms of that master plan, major theme of taking care of what we got, it really is, as you can see, focused on maintenance and enhancement with a smaller amount for new. And as we go through the project next year and updating our strategy, we're really trying to get that, keeping that balance in mind, where new is understanding the community needs and putting things on the ground, like the growth in tennis and pickleball over the last few years coming out of COVID, versus maintenance of objects like where we're looking for replacement or updating items, frankly, like the North Boulder project. The other major funding source is our CCRS tax, and you'll see there we've got 45 million. The difference with the CIP and the CCRS is the CCRS is directed towards specific projects. In other words, the CIP has a little bit more flexibility. I know as a board, you recommend it and it goes to council every year. As part of the strategy, if we do see changes, obviously we'd come back about the CIP and say, hey, this project has an increased budget, or we're thinking of this year for this project, or this new project emerged. So we'd obviously get approval for you, but it does have that flexibility. Whereas the CCRS currently is really focused on 3 main projects. That's the Boulder Creek Path, the Civic Area, and the Pearl Street Mall. And there is additional funding in there to think about the rec centers. But like I said, that's something we'll be coming back to you in early January to talk more about. So after talking about our overview of how we'll look at the capital investment strategy, I just want to touch base on our asset management system. And I'm not going to go into detail on the asset management system. I just want to talk about how it helps inform the CIS. And basically, there's really questions we want to ask as we move into phase 2. And what I mean by that is we've committed to a phase 2 for our asset management system, Beehive, in 2023, to really update it, answering some of these questions. What do we own? What's it worth? What are the infrastructure funding gaps? And then the last bullet is a really interesting one. What's the true life cycle cost of an asset? And this is when we get really strategic, don't we, as a department working with yourselves as PRAB. And the example I'll give is, let's just look at courts across our system currently. We mostly do replacement of surface, repainting lines. And that is a typical maintenance cost that over 20 years adds up. The reality is, because the court services are built on clay soils that upheave a lot, that turns out to be a lot of maintenance. If we look at true life cycle cost, we might look at a new type of court surface, a post-tensile concrete surface. That'll have a higher upfront cost, but potentially a lower long-term maintenance cost. So when we're starting to come back in 2023 to discuss this, we're going to be talking about, is it worth having a higher investment upfront for a lower maintenance cost over time, which therefore reduces the total cost. And that's when we get into some of the intricacies and the complexity of this decision-making to get the best investment strategy we can. And just to show you how we're starting to catch up on the asset management system and how that can help inform the CIP, I just want to show you, this is a prototype dashboard we've been working on. I want to give our GIS specialist, Christy Spielman, credit here, done a lot of work. In the center of the screen, you're seeing North Boulder Park. It's kind of the topic of the day tonight. And you're seeing all the assets listed for the park on that map. They've recently been re-inventoried to understand if there's been any new additions. On the right, you're seeing a dashboard that shows the actual types of assets and how many there are for the park. On the left, you're starting to see some of the analysis. What is the condition? Is it good, fair, poor? Good, hey, we need to come back and inspect it later. Fair, we might need to do a minor maintenance or major maintenance fixed. Poor, we might be looking at enhancement or replacement. So that's that sort of information for one park. And you can imagine that going across the system, that'll help us prioritize criticality of need that then informs what we need to invest in across this park system. So the last topic I want to cover before I jump into the schedule is diving into what are our major focus for 23-24. And some of these items you're already familiar with. And the main thing I just want to mention before I dive into the projects is we're working on a couple of ways to share this information. And obviously, in the past, a lot of the way we did work was, frankly, putting it on paper, relying on institutional memory to understand the condition of our assets in the system. and the types of new assets and plans that were coming into the system. It was an okay way to do it, but over time, if someone leaves, or frankly, as the system gets more complex, it's hard to track. So this is a dashboard from GIS. The next item is a map in GIS that emerges from Beehive. And what I just want to say here is we'll come back to you in 2023. We want to be able to provide really a lot of clarity, simple ways to explain some of the complexity of the system so we can better understand the data to help us have these data-driven decision-making that can occur. And the fact that it's in these databases now is over years, as we get trends and patterns, we'll be able to also make better decisions. So in this dashboard, what you're looking at is an example of 26 projects that are in the works for 23-24. On the top right, you see the type of category it's in for the citywide categories for CIP, enhancement, maintenance, new, planning. On the right, bottom right, you see the project type, and that is like, is it a planning study, a site plan, an individual asset replacement? And then on the left, you're starting to see just basically the park, the year it's going to start, and then eventually we'll be, hopefully by 23, have some more accurate budget numbers to put in there for you. And then this last slide before I go into next steps is really this GIS map in development that starts to display the maps, sorry, the parks and the facilities that are in the capital investment program based upon the types of planning we're doing. And what I mean by that is it's kind of the scale of effort for the capital process. The top left, red, for example, you'll see that's system-wide plans. So that's something like the HIP plan, the Historic Places plan, that'll be coming to you in December. That talks about cultural assets across the system. The next thing in green is you see park plans. And this is something you touched on earlier as a board. You know, hey, can we look at all age ranges? Well, when we're looking at parks as a whole, we will be looking at all ranges of ages, all activities, and what needs to be done to update the park. In the orange, which is like what you saw tonight, North Boulder Park, this is a site plan. It's just a geographic specific area within the park that's got a few assets that we need to replace. It's got a somewhat restricted scope. And then the last part in the cream color is individual assets like courts or aquatics or parking lots, mobility and access, where we've funded those types of assets across the system and we've prioritized what needs replacement. In this case, it'll be using our Beehive system to inform that. So you just get a sense there, some of the projects coming forward, the civic area, Violet Park, Pleasant View, there's some of the major park plans we're thinking about. We mentioned North Boulder Park, but we've got the Flatirons Golf Course in terms of the replacement of the facility, East Boulder Community Center. And then in terms of assets themselves, there's just some of the smaller assets that need replacing. You can see are spread throughout the system. The thing I like about this type of mapping as well is it helps us think about equity and other factors as we go into capital investment strategies, not just things like condition or cost. So with that, I'll just give you the schedule. We're going to be working through the end of the year to really put together the analysis, update our condition assessment, costing, how we basically pull all the different items tonight I've described together. And the goal is that we can come back to you in March for a study session to really get some good input on this. And like I said, with some really good information data for you to make those decisions to get that input from you. And then in April, similar to that 2016-2026 plan, we'll be bringing a plan to you then to review based upon the input we've received from yourselves to put together that strategic investment plan. From there, you'll see the typical sort of CIP process that Jackson has typically led and moves forward in terms of approving the CIP for the next year and having that 6-year outlook, which is informed by the strategic plan. And I've just put the November item on there in 23, just so you can see that the idea here is that, hey, we're not just going to put this plan on a shelf for like 6-7 years and then come back. We'll be coming back in November, similar to now, but next November we'll be saying, here's the progress we've made and here's some tweaks we might want to consider for the following year. So with that, that's the end of the presentation. I'll just leave it open for any questions you might have. Thank you.
I don't see any questions, but I want to just give you some kudos, Mark, because I've worked in so many cities and we're always just 5 years behind. You know what I mean? And we're very, very thoughtful presentation, very thoughtful, just the whole thing, you know, getting us prepared. I mean, I really just think that our department is just really top notch to be prepared for something like this.
I appreciate that, and I do want to give credit to people who've come before me who put, for instance, that strategic plan together, and then input from people like Jackson, Ali, and the whole, frankly, leadership team, like Dennis in operations.
Yes,
I feel quite lucky to work here so far.
great. Chuck?
So reading the materials and the that went out before the meeting, I was having a hard time understanding what the CIS is, but I think I get it now. It's basically everything that goes on under the hood that leads to our CIP every year, right? You know, the evaluation of our resources and what, you know, the long-term strategy that ultimately will lead to a clear CIP plan that we approve every year for the next 6 years. Is that a good summary?
Yeah, excellent, Chuck. And I think as the asset management system comes online and we've got, like I said earlier, better tools to display and share the data, it helps. It'll hopefully improve the informed decision making.
Great, thanks very much.
Thank you for joining us and thank you for the presentation. Ali, did you want to, are we okay to move on? All right. Now back to matters from the board members. Prab retreat planning, so we'll go to Jason.
Okay, thanks, Pam. We went through this at the last meeting, but I think there might have only been 4 of us there. So happy to go through this again. We've made some changes, Ellie and I, working with Ali, to what we had last time. So if it's okay, Pam, I can just walk through it again and then we can highlight some of the updates, or what's best.
Sure, I think that's great. I thought it was such a concise presentation last time. I wouldn't mind doing it again.
Okay, happy to try to be concise. And for some reason I was thinking November seems so far away, and then all of a sudden I'm like, this is in like a week and a half, 2 weeks. So it's just around the corner, but
Exactly.
yeah. Anyway, you know, it's in the packet obviously, but we had a just kind of brief welcome icebreaker. Last year we did a trivia, which we have some version of that at the halfway point, but just a chance for people to kind of, you know, obviously we have some new board members, we'll be in person, many of us will be meeting for the first time. So a chance to kind of introduce ourselves, talk about our lives, our families, our work. And maybe we just had kind of a prompt question here, a prompting question. People could talk about their favorite Boulder Parker facility and why, just as a way to kind of tie it back to our work on the board. And then, you know, we kind of designed this around, and Elliot, feel free to weigh in on things here since we've worked on this together. You know, a lot of folks have, I think one thing we've taken over definitely over the last few months, over the last year is, you know, board members' interest in a lot of the major issues that may not be central to kind of our day-to-day, our monthly meetings, but are really central to parks and to central issues facing the city. And so without getting to very specific issues, particularly issues that are on the ballot this year, we kind of we put 2 different categories, future development and public safety. And so kind of using the framing from the city attorney or deputy attorney earlier today, just wanted to get into a discussion on, you know, what the department's role, what the board's role is in dealing with some of these major issues in the city. And I can just read it specifically. We'd like to understand the impact of these issues on the Parks and Rec department, the property, facilities, budget, and PRAB's role in these issues, opportunities for the board, limitations for the board, which we kind of got into a little bit, and how best PRAB can be informed and kept up to speed on these issues. So That we have as kind of our first discussion item. 30 minutes for that. That should be a good, interesting discussion. To break it up a little bit, have a little fun. We loved what Pam had planned last year. For those of us that were here, Sunny and Anita, we had a great trivia game, which we'd like to do again. So some kind of fun activity where we I think it was questions about ourselves, some questions about parks, just something that's fun for all of us. And then moving to discussion item number 2, we titled this, "How can we leverage our role to impact issues in Boulder?" And this is kind of just the next step from the first conversation. You know, again, I can read these. Following up on our first discussion, we'd like to spend some time discussing specific steps PrAB can take to be more active in some of these major issues facing the city. We want to talk through kind of what we're currently doing, which is the annual letter. Talking through, you know, we usually kind of highlight some of our attendance at events, and then just what more we could be doing. So trying to, you know, expand on, you know, how we're involved, where we're involved, you know, maybe potentially thinking outside the box on not just doing necessarily the same things every year, but looking into some other ideas for us as board members and collectively as a board to get involved and be involved in some of the major issues in the city. So we listed some potential questions here. Is there a more effective or regular way for us to communicate to council? Besides the annual letter, should we have goals around public events? Can we have a master calendar of the city and BPR events? Should we have a liaison with the city council? Let's see, how can we work more closely with other boards on intersectional issues? I know, Mary, you talked about the work you did on greenways, you know, kind of what other opportunities might we have along those lines? And how can PrAB best be informed about future events? You know, potential separate emails about this, maybe a separate agenda item. I know Allie's done a lot to highlight that up front. Maybe there's a better place. And these are all things we just, you know, potential questions to lead our discussion. Not necessarily, we don't have answers to these. These are things we can talk about as a group. So, and then just kind of, we thought this would be a fun section on people bringing burning questions they might have about Boulder Parks or the department to this, and we could put Allie and maybe other members of staff on the hot seat to answer these questions. I mentioned this last meeting. This is where this came from. Is I was at we call this the Rock Park, but Arapahoe Ridge Park, and 2 of my 3 kids were at the bottom of the huge pile of rocks, and all of a sudden I was just thinking to myself, I really hope that there's a lot of engineering and, you know, other kinds of work done regularly to make sure this is safe. And so that kind of prompted my burning question. Allie answered it last meeting that there's, I think you said, annual reviews and regular kind of engineering checks, but just an idea for kind of things that you know, we may think of in our daily lives. It's a good opportunity to ask staff some of these questions, fun questions, you know, serious questions maybe, but I thought that'd be a good way to close our reunion or, you know, our retreat. So yeah, that's about it. I think then we'd have a kind of closing reflection time to talk about next steps, you know, to wrap up our discussion. And yeah, I think that's it. Elliot, I don't know if you want to add anything else to what I've said, but feel free. We worked on this together.
No, I think that's pretty good overview. I did have a question though, just on the agenda document itself. Could we clarify the address? Because it seems like looks like 2520 something street. I just want to make sure people know where to go.
Good point. I think I added that in. It looks like I didn't do it correctly. So I don't know.
That's going to be an amazing retreat. We'll all just go to our own special spot in Boulder. Just to clarify out loud, we'll clarify the address, but we're going to the Open Space Mountain Parks Hub. It's basically 55th and I think it's Flatiron Parkway. It's just, if you are driving north on 55th, you're going to pass the Society and turn right at that second light. We'll get this corrected and emailed to you all with the correct address for the hub. And if you all wanted, I mean, in fact, it should be
25, 25th, 55th, right?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure we've sent you all an appointment. Let me just pull it up real quick and make sure it has the correct address. I think it does. Since I'm talking, can I also just say out loud, I feel the need, if I say out loud more planned for this, it won't happen. My husband is running the New York Marathon the day before. We're taking the kids to New York. We're seeing Hamilton. We're doing the parks. It's going to be amazing. I fly back on Monday. I'm flying back before the family, but because one of my colleagues just got to spend 2 unexpected days in Orlando due to flight issues, I want the board to be prepared. I will have a backup plan. I intend to be there, but we'll have a plan in case, life. So I didn't, honestly, if I had been thinking and had my head on straight when this was all being coordinated, I might have suggested, I wouldn't have put that date out as an option, right? Because I certainly want to make sure that I am at your retreat, but I am also going to be there to support my husband at his 3rd running of the New York Marathon. So now that I've talked about it and our team will have a plan, it will all be lovely.
You're on mute now.
Thanks, Mary. I was just pulling up. I don't see an appointment on our calendars for the 7th. And so we'll get an appointment out and we'll make sure it has the address in it. And we'll also, if this retreat agenda is final, we'll get that on there.
Do we know if all 7 of us are available that day?
I remember it was the date that had the most responses in the doodle poll, but if I recall correctly, there were 2 folks who did not respond. So it doesn't hurt to get a gut check and make sure.
I have it pulled up here. It looks like Anita accepted. Chuck, you have not accepted yet. Elia accepted. Mary, Jason, Sunny, you have not accepted yet. And Pam, you have accepted. So I think the only one that was a maybe was Elliot.
And there
I'll
we
be
go.
there.
Thank you, Rosa. There is an appointment. I don't know why I didn't see it on my calendar. Thank you.
I'll be there. I'm not sure why it wasn't accepted, but I don't know where that thing is to accept it now. So I'm officially accepting it now.
Me too.
I can
You know what might
resend
have
it.
happened? Do you ever click accept and do not send a response? If you do that, you might think you're saving an email to the person you're responding, but they cannot track your response. And so if you clicked accept or decline and do not send a response, the meeting organizer doesn't know that you accepted or declined.
Oh, that might be what happened then. Yeah.
I didn't
Yeah.
know that, huh? So may I ask a question?
Oh, yes, please, Chuck.
So this is a publicly noticed meeting, and do we have to follow the rules of order, parliamentary rules, procedure, et cetera, for this upcoming meeting? Or is it more casual? Do we relax those rules?
All of it is relaxed and there is no public comment also for a study session. And it has to be publicly noticed because you're going to be gathering. And that's actually on our list for this week, is just to confirm with the clerk's office, given that members of the public won't be there in person. We need to make sure we do everything to comply with all the sunshine laws and also, but I believe you're allowed to be very relaxed and appropriate.
Well, hopefully appropriate.
I just had to say it out loud. Now I'm protected. You can make whatever choices you make.
Okay, great. All right, fantastic. Well, before we move on to the next item, which is Proud Matters, we have had a member of the public in the queue that came in after public comment. So I would need a vote from the board to allow this person to speak, if that would work for you all. Can I get a vote? I need a majority of vote to allow this person to have 3 minutes to speak. It's
Can I say a comment though? It's Mary Scott.
Okay.
Hi, I obviously we're here for the public representing. And if we're gonna do this each time, if this should come up a couple times a year, okay, that's fine. But it just seems like, making exceptions beyond an occasional here and there starts to get out of kind of the planned agenda. So I just wanted to say that. Like, what if 5 people wanted to come at the end because, they missed? I'm not blaming anyone, but I just wanted to throw that out.
Sure. Well, every one of us has a vote. So do we need to roll call it, Ally, or is it just a thumbs up, or, I can.
Definitely not a roll call vote, just
Okay.
needs majority.
Can you just put your hand up, your little hand up, if it's okay with you?
Can I make a quick comment first?
Sure. Yeah, sure.
So we have a process for registering in advance of the meeting so that you're on the list for public engagement. And this person, who I think is Lynn Siegel, right?
Yes.
Has provided commentary at the last 3, at least, PrAB meetings. And I don't believe she's followed the procedure in any of these meetings. So regardless of how we vote today, I would like to say that we can't allow this to continue, and that every member of the public needs to follow the procedures that we've set in place that most people seem to be able to find and follow in order for them to engage in public comment appropriately.
Okay. So I have 1 no. I have 1, 2, 3. Okay, so at this time, I'm so sorry, Lynn, it's not going to be allowed for you to speak at this time. So we hope to hear from you at the next PrAB meeting, and hope that you can register on time. And so with that, we'll move on to PrAB matters.
And certainly we could take an email, right?
Of course, absolutely. Does anybody have anything they want to share in PrAB matters that they've done, that they've seen, that they've experienced in the last month? Or everyone just tired and ready to go home? All right, great. Well, with that, our next, very excited. You're right, Jason. It's literally around the corner, the retreat. And I just found out I have a huge event that morning in California that I need to be at. So I will also be on a plane coming back. And so, hopefully there's no snowstorm that day. But I should be landing in Denver around 3 o'clock. So I should be there on time. But with that, and then our next virtual meeting will be on the 28th. So if I could get a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Mary, can I get a second?
Second.
Okay, thank you, Elliot. All of you have a great evening. Thank you so much, Ally and your team. They did a lot of work today for tonight. We appreciate it. Good night, everyone.